in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken.
Senator Kennedy is speaking in Washington as, again, one of the planes was hijacked.
Right there. Thank you.
Let's go to WNBC, NBC's Pat Dawson.
Discuss education. I do want to thank folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
No. That, of course, was President Bush, who is in Florida in Longboat Key. He was speaking at an elementary school. He had planned to be talking about literacy. Obviously, he had to change. He mentioned that this is an apparent terrorist attack. He is traveling back to Washington. He said that he had spoken to the governor of New York as well as the vice president, that all the resources will be brought to bear by the federal government to determine who did this and who was responsible for this terrible, terrible event. And then, of course, it was followed by a moment of silence for the victims.
We're going to go to Andrea Mitchell now, who has more information on this tragedy. Andrea?
Matt and Katie, I've spoken to a top U.S. official who says that early reports to our intelligence community and to other officials within the administration are that this was a hijacked American Airlines plane en route from Boston to Los Angeles. One of the two planes, they say, was apparently a hijacked American Airlines plane. They caution that early reports still need further confirmation, but this is at least what the U.S. government is being told by American Airlines officials, apparently. They are assuming and have obviously informed the president that this is a terror attack.
And Andrea, we have no information as to in what term of the flight this plane was taken over, how much warning that air traffic controllers may have had that someone hostile was at the controls of this plane?
Exactly right. They had no other information, just that at least one of the two planes was hijacked from Boston en route to Los Angeles, presumably after it had already been in the air and en route, because I was told en route to Los Angeles. So probably hijacked after it had taken off. As you know, those are very short flights. Those are usually 737s or 757s on that route. But this clearly, according to the U.S. government, is a terror attack, as you heard the president say. Now, one of the
Ramzi Youssef and the rest of that gang wanted to do the World Trade Center as a symbol of America. So Sure, there's other symbols, but I think this is probably the tallest one on the East Coast.
Again, all of this is unconfirmed. We heard the president call it an apparent terrorist attack. At this moment, have you any doubt that's exactly what it is?
No, I have no doubt of that. I would call it an apparent attack.
I'm going to interrupt myself and everybody else for a second because one of our senior producers, Mark Obenhaus, is on the phone, and he saw the incident. Mark, do you hear me?
I do indeed, Peter.
Go ahead.
Well, I was leaving my house to go to work, and I walked down the street to go to the subway. I was at the corner of Franklin and West Broadway, and as I was approaching the subway, a tremendous roar went over my head, and I looked up immediately, and it was a plane, and much lower than I've ever seen a plane in Lower Manhattan. And it was a large plane. I couldn't identify it as anything specific except that it was a commercial jet, certainly. And then my eyes followed it because this is approximately 15 blocks from the World Trade Center, and it just slammed right into it and was completely engulfed by the building. It was extraordinary. No wings flew off, nothing like that. It just went directly in, creating this sort of cavern-like hole, and suddenly then big flames started protruding from it, and then of course smoke, and then debris started just catapulting. And of course the area that we're in, there's a great deal of foot traffic, and people are just approaching and beginning to just gasp at just the sight of the building itself. Even if they hadn't seen it, the actual incident, the actual impact, just the sight of this huge building engulfed in flame with this massive cavernous hole in the side of it. And we stood there, I can't tell you the amount of time, I would estimate to about 15 minutes. And of course there's also...
Shoulder there, the building still smoldering of the World Trade Center.
Well, it is a grotesque sight to look at from about 30 blocks away from where we are. For those of you just joining us, let's just briefly recap what we know. About an hour ago, about 8:45 Eastern Time, one plane crashed into the tower, the World Trade Center tower on the right, the first of those towers that you can see behind me. And then about a half hour later, a second plane crashed into the tower number 2. That's the one to the left, where the darker smoke is billowing out right now. We have reports, CNN has been told that one of the planes was an American Airlines 767 that had been hijacked from Boston. We don't know if that was the first or the second plane that hit the tower, but we do know that it was a 767 American Airlines jet. At least that's what CNN has been told by sources so far this morning. We also have reports of 1,000 injuries. That is unconfirmed, and we always remind you in moments like these that as these initial reports come in, it is very early. I can tell you, driving in, it is extraordinarily chaotic on the west side of New York. It is the kind of situation where numbers change, where situations change, but this is the information we have now, that there are at least 1,000 injuries, and we're working on that. As you can see, the smoke billowing out of the Trade Center. In Sarasota, Florida now, Major Garrett joins us. Major, what are you being told?
Hello. President Bush has notified, and talked rather, to Vice President Cheney. He has talked to the FBI Director Robert Mueller, and he has also spoken with the Governor of New York, Governor Pataki, about this catastrophe. The President will convene a national security meeting upon his arrival back at Washington. Those are the 4 pieces of information we have gathered here in the moment since I just spoke to you on the telephone. The President, as we just saw a few moments ago, identifying this as an apparent act of terrorism against the United States, said there will be a full investigation. The entire apparatus, the United States government, FBI, national security, CIA, the Vice President, who you may remember was placed in charge of a domestic terrorism study group within the White House to monitor and develop plans to deal with a catastrophe of just this kind. All those parts of the government have been mobilized. The President is heading back to Washington very soon. Here's what the President said about this catastrophe at the Twin Towers in New York just a few moments ago here at Sarasota Elementary School.
Major, it's Aaron.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
The president was first notified about the situation in New York by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Then the second notification updating him with more details on the situation came from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, who's traveling with the president here in Sarasota. The day was supposed to talk about education reform, but the president is scrubbing all of those plans, marshaling all the resources of the federal government, talking with his aides as he can, and preparing to fly back to Washington to, again, as we said, convene a National Security Council meeting. Back to you.
Major, before you get away, and I apologize if I'm asking you to repeat something, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Do we know exactly where the president was when he was told?
He was just arriving here in Sarasota at Emma E. Booker Elementary School. He had taken an early morning jog this morning in Sarasota, had just arrived here with a presidential motorcade. Then the spectacular, horrific pictures began appearing on television sets here at the elementary school. The president received a telephone call from Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor. Then he received an update from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, traveling with him. Then it was made clear to the press, traveling with the president, he would make a statement. Shortly before that statement, he was actually sitting down with some children here at the elementary school, reading them a book. Reporters asked him if he knew about the situation of the Twin Towers. He nodded and said he would talk about it momentarily. In fact, he did. We just heard the president's statement declaring this an apparent act of terrorism. Yes, Aaron?
Let me interrupt you here. Senator Kennedy is speaking in Washington as, again, one of the planes was hijacked from Boston. Perhaps we can hear the senator now.
This morning, we underline the point that it is postponed. We are not going to see the business of America deferred because of terrorism, whether it's in education or in another area of public policy. We're looking forward to hearing from the First Lady on a subject matter which is of central concern to all families in this country, and because of her experience and her leadership, this committee and the Congress and the American people would have benefited greatly from her comments. And we will look forward to an early
Senator Ted Kennedy in Washington. Chris Plant, a CNN producer, is at the Pentagon, where there is a significant fire. Chris, you're on the phone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Tell me what you know.
Well, arriving at the Pentagon a short time ago, there was a huge plume of smoke which continues to rise from the west side of the Pentagon over in the area where there is a helicopter landing zone. It's along Route 27 if you're looking at maps of the area. The building is currently being evacuated, and police and emergency units are, of course, responding from all around the building and from the local Arlington County Fire Department. The plume of smoke is enormous. It's a couple of hundred yards across. At its base, it is billowing into the sky, hundreds of yards. It's impossible for me to say from this side of the building whether the building itself is on fire or up in flames, or exactly what
would ordinarily occur here.
I must also tell you, Claire, I think if you think about what's behind the EOB there, you're really down in pretty open area. It doesn't look like a place where a building would be on fire.
No, that's right, although there are a number of buildings just behind the old executive office building on G Street that could potentially be on fire, but nothing you would necessarily think of as a target. Apparently, we're also
Claire, let me interrupt you for a second. We now have fire confirmed at the Pentagon. John McCarthy at the Pentagon can hear me. John, please get in touch immediately if you can and brief us in there. John McCarthy has actually been evacuated from the Pentagon, and parts of the Pentagon are indeed being evacuated. want to hold our breath here, it just seems to me, for a second, and not get into a mode that the country is under attack. But we now have 2 attacks on the Twin Trade Tower Center. U.S. buildings, city buildings completely evacuated in New York City. We have this mysterious black smoke at the southwest corner of the White House, which is to say there's something going on behind the old executive office building. We now have a report that fire has been confirmed at the Pentagon. ABC's John McWethy, our Pentagon correspondent, who's been plugging in as quickly to the intelligence and counterintelligence units there this morning, has been temporarily evacuated. But that is as much as we know for sure at the moment. John Miller, go back to what you're hearing on your nets.
Actually, it's interesting. In New York City,
that runs essentially from the Capitol to the White House.
Commercial aircraft bored into, there it is again, bored into the second of the 2 towers at a lower level. At this point, we do not have any confirmation of casualties or injuries, or even confirmation that these planes were hijacked. Nonetheless, we do have a couple of reports, one from AP, one from Reuters, reporting that an American Airlines plane was hijacked, that a United Airlines plane was hijacked, supposedly one of those 2 planes hijacked out of Boston.
A hearing that was scheduled for her to appear at has been canceled. We would be watching very carefully to see whether she is also asked to leave the Capitol and go to a safe place.
Yeah, Brian Wilson, the Capitol is being evacuated, we're told, and clearly that shot that we have on our screen now, this is the Pentagon just across the river from Washington, D.C. You gotta believe that it has happened again. Another large airliner, perhaps hijacked, perhaps part of some widespread plan, apparently slamming into at least the area around the Pentagon, along with the World Trade Center in Manhattan, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. The Sears Tower in Chicago is being evacuated. Clearly, authorities all over the country are trying to be prudent in this unbelievable catastrophe. 2 towers of the World Trade Center, 50,000 people who work in those buildings on fire, the fire out of control. Firefighters are going to take days, perhaps, to get this under control, but the Twin Towers on fire as after being slammed into by 2 jetliners earlier this morning. Bill Daly, let me bring you into the conversation. Actually, yeah. Bill, let me interrupt for just a second. Molly Falconer has some updated information for us. Molly? Molly Falconer, are you with us? All right, Bill Daly, let me go back to you for a minute. Clearly a coordinated strike. My heart is pounding. I'm sure yours is as well. What does the FBI do at this point? What does the nation's military do?
Well, certainly the nation's military will be put on alert. This is no doubt about it. Is that, you know, when in the gaming of looking at potential terrorist events, it's always the concern, as David Asman mentioned earlier, that there'll be some type of diversionary incident, and there'll be several others. And I think clearly this is what we're seeing here. The concern is that when a terrorist
that is athlete bodies, but I can see it sure looks that way.
All right.
And then red splotches on the street in front of the building.
Okay.
Mark, a couple of things I want to pass along very quickly. According to the Associated Press, the White House has been threatened with a terrorist attack, according to a source. The West Wing has been evacuated. We want to mention now the Capitol has been evacuated as well the U.S. Treasury. And also on another front, I want to mention that this Palestinian group has denied responsibility for the
Palestinians don't have this kind of muscle. All aircraft flights in the United States have now been canceled. Every aircraft in the air has been ordered to land at the nearest airport immediately. This is obviously a step to clear the air of all innocent aircraft. Whether there remain any guilty aircraft is debatable, but at least what the government is trying to do is clear the air, and obviously, well, not obviously, but it looks like what they will do is they will then put up military planes
We'd had word of one of them, now both of them. The FBI is calling this, saying this was a probable terrorist incident. President Bush is calling it an apparent terrorist act, and in very brief remarks this morning, he promised it would stand. He did go to an event that he was supposed to attend this morning in Sarasota, Florida, for his education initiative and spoke to the school children, but only long enough to say that his prayers were with the people, and he promised a full investigation.
Hey, with all you have going, it's one less thing to worry about.
Believed to be at the White House roof. Perhaps this plane, that if it was a plane at the Pentagon, was heading toward the Pentagon. Could it have been shot down by our military before it got there? Because that appears to be smoke from jet fuel a little bit away from the Pentagon, not on the building, actual building itself. As we look at this. But let me again say the plane that I saw was heading here in Manhattan. The first plane that I believe was heading south. It was above Fifth Avenue at a low altitude, which was rare, but it is a usual jet route from planes, especially planes that are vectored down from the north, whether it be from Canada or whether it be from Boston. As Rita Cosby, our colleague, had reported, there are sources telling her that perhaps it was one of the planes was a hijacked plane from Boston.
We have witnesses at the Pentagon who say that a helicopter was near the Pentagon, and then there was an explosion. So again, folks, stay with us. This is all coming into us. Breaking news. You can imagine the catastrophe that we're trying to deal with here, but clearly 3 explosions, 2 at the World Trade Center, one outside or very near the Pentagon. Molly Falconer is at one of the New York area hospitals and has some updated information on the number of injuries. Molly?
Hi, John. I'm coming to you live from downtown Manhattan, where St. Vincent's Hospital basically looks like it is under siege. There are flares out forming a block perimeter around this hospital. I've watched one victim come out of an ambulance, go in on a stretcher. They look exceedingly injured, and right now there are hospital beds lined up on the street right outside the hospital waiting.
There's a fire on the mall, and we do know that a plane has crashed in the Pentagon. That's really the extent. I don't want to speculate beyond that.
Well, I just want to...
Hello? Bill, through with him. We are getting a report here. I'm looking. Paul Begala, Democratic consultant to Bill Clinton, is being quoted on the wire as saying he witnessed the explosion near the Pentagon shortly after 2 planes crashed in the World Trade Center. He says it was a huge fireball, a huge orange fireball, and he says another witness told him that a helicopter exploded. He is saying that another witness told him a helicopter exploded. Let's go to Bill Plant. Bill can't hear me, but I understand we can get his audio. So let's go ahead and signal Bill to tell us what he's got.
Bill Plant in Washington. I am across the street from the White House on the other side of Lafayette Park, approximately 1 block away. They have evacuated the entire White House staff and the staff of the old executive office building next door. We understand that the Treasury is also being evacuated. There's a lot of activity, fire trucks, ambulances, but as far as we know, there is no damage in the White House complex. I repeat, no damage that we know of in the White House complex. But this was in response to damage elsewhere, to the New York aircraft incidents and to whatever it was that happened at the Pentagon. But this is a full alert. The Secret Service has moved everybody away from the White House grounds, away from the White House complex. And they keep telling us that we have to remain a block away. There are fire trucks going by, ambulances going by, headed we know not where. But this is obviously a precautionary measure because no one clearly knows what to expect next. Right?
All right, Bill Plant. And again, Bill is unable.
The floor just buckled up under him and the roof caved in on him.
All right, Mick, thank you very much. We want to move a couple of miles away from you right now to the White House where Bob Kerr is standing by. And Bob, we understand that building has now been evacuated?
Matt, that's true. It is
utterly country where people have been caught with the components to make the bombs. So it doesn't surprise me that we are the target of an attack. It surprises me that it's taken as long for us to suffer what we've suffered. And it creates a very heightened awareness of what we have to.
I spoke to an administration official shortly after the president delivered his statement, who said obviously the operating assumption here is terrorism. The initial assumption, this official said, was that this had something to do, or at least they were looking into any possible connections with Osama bin Laden.
Just to add, John, a bit to what you've been saying, we're getting a report from Associated Press now that the White House was evacuated after the Secret Service received what AP is describing as a credible, a credible threat of a terrorist attack against the White House itself. And I expect you'll be checking that out. We'll try and confirm that, but that's what AP is reporting right now. Again, this all began about an hour and 15 minutes ago here in Lower Manhattan when the first of two planes crashed in to the first of the two towers behind me at the World Trade Center, and you can see the smoke billowing out of the front tower now. And then about a half an hour later, just as emergency crews were converging on the scene as
tours. You had hordes of tourists and others still in the White House on tour, lining up outside to get in. There seemed to be absolutely no unusual activity outside the White House until word came of the incident at the Pentagon. So it's been quite a dramatic shift here.
You know, in terms of responsibility, Tom and Matt and Bob, apparently a senior official from the Radical Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine denied on Tuesday the group had any connection to the plane crash. An anonymous caller had told television that it was behind the crash, but, quote, "I emphasize that the story released on television by an anonymous person is totally incorrect." Tassir Khaled, a senior official from the DFLP Politburo in the Palestinian territories, told Reuters. The DFLP is against hijacking planes and against endangering the lives of civilians who are not connected with the struggle of this region, he said.
There are going to be a lot of claims and counterclaims in the course of the next 24 hours or so. This is a task for investigators of extraordinary magnitude to try to determine who did this and how they got away with it. You think about an American Airlines flight that was on its way from Boston to Los Angeles, was hijacked in midair. They're now citing transmissions from the plane, so they have hard evidence of that, and then brought down here and made to fly into the Twin Trade Towers. Did one of the hijackers get control? Did they shoot the pilot? It boggles the mind beyond our ability to figure out what was going on.
You talk about transmissions. I was just curious. Have you had any evidence of what was said during those
They're just saying they're
transmissions?
citing transmission to know that the plane had been hijacked. That's all that they're saying about it at this point. We also ought to remind everyone, once again, this is an exceptional development. The FAA has banned all takeoffs at all airports across America. This country, in terms of air travel, has been immobilized. A good portion of the nation's capital, the most powerful center in the world, has been immobilized as well as a result of these terrorist
And that's
attacks.
a very haunting description that Bob Kerr just gave of that low-flying aircraft near the White House, and one can only wonder if that was something that ultimately ended up in the Pentagon.
We just saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center. If we can re-rack that to about 20 seconds ago, you'll see something dramatic happening.
But just look at that. That is about as frightening a scene as you will ever see. Again, this is going on now in two cities. We have a report that there's a fire at the State Department as well, and that is being evacuated. So we've got fires at the Pentagon evacuated, the State Department evacuated, the White House evacuated on the basis of what the Secret Service describes as a credible terrorist threat. We have two explosions, two planes hitting the World Trade Center here in New York, and that was from the impact of this first plane that hit it, or whether something else has happened there, and we'll work on that. Our Washington Bureau Chief, Frank Cesno, is on the phone. Frank, what are you hearing?
Aaron, I just drove past the Pentagon across the 14th Street Bridge, which is now choked with traffic. We're beginning to hear emergency sirens and rescue personnel fanning out across Washington. There is a gigantic black billowing cloud of smoke.
Of the building. As he approached it, police told him to get out of the building immediately. He ran outside and watched people jump out of the first building, and then there was a second explosion.
This footage we're seeing right now shows that the damage is so severe. I mean, we had seen what seemed to be two fairly self-contained impact craters before, and now it appears something much more dramatic has happened to at least one of those towers.
These pictures are beyond belief.
We have a report that the second plane may have flown out of Newark, New Jersey. This is an official who was speaking.
Just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Peter?
Yes, Dan.
What appeared to happen from my vantage point, the top part of the building was totally involved in fire, and there appeared to be no effort possible to put that fire out. It looked like the top part of the building was so weakened by the fire that the weight of it collapsed the rest of the building. That's what appeared to happen. I did not see anything happening at the base of the building. It all appeared to start at the top and then just collapse the rest of the building by the sheer weight of the top. There was no explosion or anything at the base part of it, but I did see that the top part of it started to collapse. The walls started to bulge out, bricks, glass things coming out, and then it collapsed in on itself, and it appeared to just fold down from there, from the very top.
Thanks, Don, very much. Just looking at that, I don't know why, but when was the last time the United States was attacked in this fashion? It was Pearl Harbor in 1941. John?
From the scene now, there's obviously massive casualties. Usually during these things, there's a little bit of a high pitch, but basic calm over the police radios among the emergency workers. I can hear them screaming, signal 1013, which is the police code for help, calling for help at the triage center, where other people who were already injured have been injured more, confirming that the building has collapsed. Dozens of officers, more civilians are injured. And we don't know all.
O sea, anónima, del Pentágono, tenemos estas fuentes extraoficiales diciendo que uno.
To the back of those two buildings. This is just a few minutes ago. We don't know if something happened, another explosion, or if the building was so weakened, it just collapsed. But we have one of our producers on the phone, and I didn't get the name, so why don't we just go ahead? Are you there?
Yeah, this is Rose Arcee calling from New York.
Rose, tell me what you know.
Just a few minutes ago, we saw there's a portion of the building where the first plane struck that seemed to be buckling inside itself, almost as if the top of the building was going to fall. Shortly after that, two people, it's hard to tell whether they were being pushed or they physically approached themselves the sort of river side of the building. It would be the west side of the building, and appeared to jump from the top floors, just under where you're seeing the smoke and fire.
That is extraordinary. The South Tower, the World Trade Center, has collapsed. Again, tell me, how long ago was it that you saw this?
This must have been about 5 minutes ago, and prior to that, you could see heads popping out of windows right beneath where that big gaping hole is. So there appeared to be people alive right below where the crash point was, and were trying to find some way out of there. And just as the thing started to buckle, you saw them plummeting from that top floor.
Right, and perhaps this is stating the obvious. We apologize for that, but obviously people were already at work here at the Trade Center when this happened. We don't know how many people have been hurt in all of this. We have no idea at this point. As you look at an aerial shot coming from I guess that would be coming from the south of the Trade Center, or what is at least the Trade Center behind those huge plumes of smoke. All airports across the country, every airport in the United States has been shut down.
To the window, and we thought a boiler had exploded. We weren't certain what was happening, and then a few minutes later, I saw a large commercial airline plow into the second building, very clearly veering in towards the building. And then now 5 minutes ago or so, or 3 minutes ago, the building imploded. All there is a large plume of smoke all over lower Manhattan up to the 46th floor. I literally see papers from people's offices from the World Trade Center floating in the sky past me, past the window.
Howard, thank you very much, and I think you better get out of the building.
I'm on my way. Bye.
Thank you very much. Howard Shapiro, Goldman Sachs.
Mark, the Sears
our need for information is not more important than his need to get to safety.
The Sears as well, the White House
the Capitol, the U.S. Treasury.
Well, once again, for those joining late, the government has ordered all airliners currently flying over the United States.
Debris, the smoke in the area, the hundreds of emergency personnel who've shown up on the scene trying to help out, now also affected by this incredible act of what we're being told is an act of terrorism.
Yeah, that is something that President Bush said. Apparent terrorist attack. Actually, in comments shortly afterwards, Senator Edward Kennedy and First Lady Laura Bush really made no bones about it. A terrorist attack, and clearly that is what we are dealing with here. The targets, very clear ones that, well, that you...
A plane. Star jets. All right. What are you guys doing right now? What's your assignment? What's your assignment? Help people. Are there a lot of injured? Where were we, down there? The dust is still thick in the air. What that guy is covered with is this stuff that's all over the street. Just thick soot, ash. Just came roaring down here in a huge cloud from the World Trade Center. You see just the survivors, if you will. Are you able to talk? Can we just talk to you about what happened? I was there when it exploded. You were right there at the building? Yes, a lot of people trapped. You're right? A lot of people trapped. EMT. This guy needs help.
Rick Leventhal is not able to hear me, but from his vantage point on the ground, I think it's not clear to him what's fairly clear to us,
looks like here,
our vantage point from the helicopter, that the top of Tower 1, One World Trade Center, has literally crumbled. I can't guess how many floors, perhaps 30, perhaps 40.
The tower itself is, what, I think 107 stories tall, Tower 1 and Tower 2, one in the south end, one in the north end. It appears that the first plane that hit the one on the north end. That has the restaurant, Windows in the World upstairs, and then the south towers appears to be the one that was hit the second time. That has the observation deck. That is a obviously popular tourist attraction for people. So clearly, as we see, a pandemonium. But you know, John, the FBI and the New York City Police Department have the Joint Terrorist Task Force. They have obviously experience with this. They were able to solve the others, and I'm confident, and we should be confident that.
Let's go to Brian Wilson now. He's at the in Washington. Brian, is there a report about the Pentagon?
Well, I can't tell you about that, but I was just here in front of the Capitol, which, by the way, has been evacuated, and back toward the Supreme Court area, we just heard a low, muffled thud. It sounded like a small explosion. Sirens are going off around this city like you cannot believe, and just overhead a moment ago, something I have never seen in Washington in the 16 years I've been here, military jets are now patrolling the skies over Washington, D.C. We'll try to find out more about that explosion, but it was a low thud, and I'm now seeing that there is a great deal of activity over toward the direction of the Supreme Court.
All right.
Back to you, John.
Britt Hume is with us. Britt?
John, I'm looking now on one of our remote cameras here at a picture of the scene at the Pentagon. This is a picture looking down Interstate 395, which is, you probably know, John, is a major thoroughfare in and out of Washington that is used by commuters every day in large numbers. And we're getting a sense that from a reporter out there at the scene has just said that there's been another loud bang out there, whether that is a further explosion initiated in an attack or whether it is simply a secondary blast, the result of the continuing fire. But the situation there at the Pentagon continues to evolve. We'll keep you posted.
All right. Britt Hume in Washington, thank you. Our Rick Leventhal is on the ground in Lower Manhattan, where these scenes of chaos and utter confusion are just mind-numbing. Rick, go ahead. Rick is not able to hear me, but this is the scene in Lower Manhattan where the upper floors of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, apparently have completely collapsed.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion, and everyone started running in this direction. Police officers, pedestrians, EMTs, everybody came running this way. I saw a woman pushing a baby carriage, running for her life, and right behind them was a huge cloud of billowing smoke and ash and debris coming this way. The smoke is obviously cleared somewhat. Ma'am, she's with DCPI. Can you talk to us for just a second? Bring us up to speed. I got it. Obviously, people have their hands full out here. It's not easy getting anyone to talk. Yeah, tell me where you were. What happened? What did you see? What did you hear?
First, I went on Canal Street. I saw the fire. I saw the two buildings. I'm thinking it was a bomb because it's two of them. Anyway, when I got there, I tried to save people because I'm a doctor. When I tried to save people, the moment we heard a big explosion coming down, everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow, this is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Where exactly were you standing when this happened?
I was standing right in front of the World Trade Center.
So you were down the block here? And
Right
you came
there in the
running
middle,
this way?
right, yeah.
Did you get hurt at all?
No, not me.
Did you see anyone around you getting caught up in it?
Yeah, I was with the firemen.
Other casualties.
The breaking news banner, you can see people continuing to billow out of that area, people leaving the area of the apparent attack. NBC's Rick Sanchez is in Lower Manhattan covering the Trade Center attacks. Rick, what do you have?
Well, the very latest, Lester, is a scene that's being described by some of the police officers who are scurrying about trying to get some sense of control in this area. They are saying that people have now started to jump out of the buildings, some of them in the areas, of course, where there is heavy smoke and fire, that they have had no way of getting to them, and that they have witnessed people jumping from the buildings, a story that's also been told to us by some of the people in this area just off of Canal Street. We're about 4 or 5 blocks away from the scene, and what you have is a steady flow of people, some of them running, some of them jogging, others walking briskly away from the World Trade Center, many of them with tears in their eyes, many telling stories, and some just downright distraught.
Moment, Bloomington, Indiana. Good morning.
6th Avenue, the view you see of both towers as you come down 6th Avenue.
Right.
So, and most of this fallout stops about 4 blocks back.
Give me a look down this way, Pat. You know, it does sort of look like beyond a few blocks down, it looks almost clear, but it's anything but over here.
I live at 25 Lawrence Street, a couple of blocks from here. I'm all the time hanging out in the corner on the liquor store this morning. I saw the plane coming this way in the spot. It was actually directed to the building.
Was this the first plane or the second plane?
This was the first plane. The second plane, this no second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in the building, not second plane. That was a bomb. Who said the second plane?
That's what we're told, the second plane.
No,
we saw it on television.
I saw everything.
All right, well, thanks a lot. This is...
In case you're just joining us, this is the aftermath of a horrific event that began unfolding about an hour and 20 minutes ago. A jet plane slammed into the side of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Then a few minutes later, another jet slammed into Tower 1. The second Tower 1, I should say, the upper floors have collapsed. They're absolutely gone.
I was in the restroom. There was a big shaking. Some of the ceilings collapsed. Looks like there was a fire in the elevator shafts. And they brought everyone down and started bringing everybody down the stairs.
So you came down from the 77th floor.
77th floor, down the stairs.
Down the stairs.
Yes.
What was happening around you? Was people screaming?
No, people were pretty calm. When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but everybody was really calm, and the police and firemen were very helpful.
Which of the 2 towers were you in?
1, Trade Center 1.
All right. And when you got to the ground, then what?
It's just like, it's like rubble and dust, like inches thick, and like paper everywhere, and they just moved us out.
How many people do you think were in the building on the floors that were affected? What do you think?
I mean, I'm one office out of 20 on that floor, so I have no idea.
How far above you or below you was the impact?
I think it was above us. I don't know how many floors. We saw it on TV, but I don't know.
What's the first thing you thought when you heard it?
Had to call my wife.
Did you? Were you able to?
Yeah, I got through a phone line. I called her. I'm talking to you because I'm hoping she's watching so she knows I'm okay.
What's your name?
My name is Matthew Gard.
Folks, clearly America is under attack. We can only hope that it's over, at least for now. Our David Schuster is in Washington, where there have been one, perhaps two explosions at the Pentagon. David, what can you tell us?
John, I'm actually in our office here at the Pentagon, and according to counterintelligence sources, they confirmed that it was a plane that crashed into the south end of the Pentagon near the helipad. This is a route that commercial aircraft flying into National Airport, which is just a few miles away, they take sometimes on final approach as they come to the airport. But again, intelligence sources, counterintelligence sources confirming that it was a plane that crashed on the side of the Pentagon. Now, here in our Pentagon office, our producer Chris Wright says that there was no shaking of the building or even sounds. Of course, the Pentagon is built to withstand attacks perhaps like this one. But we are getting reports from eyewitnesses who were on Highway 110, which is just west of the Pentagon. One eyewitness claiming that he saw a U.S. Air 737 plane headed toward...
All right, let's listen in now to WTTG's coverage there outside the Pentagon. This is coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area.
Okay, thank you. Hello?
The Pentagon, the world's largest office building, being evacuated. Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor, is still with us. Britt, go ahead.
Well, John, what you're seeing there is that is the interstate, or the Route 395, used to be known as the Shirley Highway, that comes up into Washington, as I mentioned earlier, a familiar commuter route. And what you're seeing there are the military personnel evacuating the building. Some, as you know, as we noted just a minute ago, or as you could see just a minute ago, were on the run. Now, we have, John, from sources, intelligence sources, what may be a claim of responsibility here. Now, I want to caution you before I note this, that at times like these, all sorts of claims are made. So this needs to be treated with some caution. But some intelligence sources are now saying that the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine is claiming credit. In the meantime, however, the Israeli government is said by sources to believe that Osama bin Laden is responsible for the operation, and those two organizations are related, but they are not exactly the same. I suspect, John, before all is said and done, we will hear more on that aspect of all this, but obviously that is something that we're all keeping an eye on to see if some kind of authenticatable or credible claim of responsibility for these astonishing attacks is made that we can believe. Again, you're looking again at the interstate road, Route 395 that runs down past the Pentagon. That is just, of course, across the river from Washington, D.C., and the smoke you're seeing is indeed from the area out by the helipad, which can be seen by drivers as they go by the Pentagon, and you're seeing the smoke from it. It appeared from some pictures we saw earlier, John, of the building itself, that while it was clearly damaged and in the area where the hit was very badly
site, we cannot give you much of an organizational sense beyond telling you probably what you already know, which is that two separate aircraft have struck.
The Associated Press now, in a flash, quoting the Associated Press, one World Trade Center tower has collapsed. Period. And let's pause for a moment, because given the photographs, the live pictures we have, it's very difficult to confirm that report that a whole tower has collapsed. We're going to stick with the moment, for the moment, with the report that a portion of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Perhaps that's what the Associated Press means. With me here is Russ Mitchell in New York. Russ, seeing these pictures of the World Trade Center, both towers aflame, all that smoke down in that part of Manhattan, is reminiscent of what happened in the World Trade Center not quite 10 years ago.
That's right. It was February 26, 1993. 6 people were killed in a terrorist bombing, over 1,000 people injured. And for folks who are really not familiar with the World Trade Center, let's kind of put things in perspective for you. These are twin towers. They were dedicated back in 1973. They are each more than 1,300 feet tall, 110 stories. As Mika Brzezinski reported a few minutes ago, 50,000 people work in these twin towers, and we're talking about things from brokerage firms to law firms and other offices. on those floors.
Good morning, everybody. Lydia Lenker coming to you from News Channel 5. This is a developing national crisis, but it does have impact across the country right here in Nashville. If you have any planes coming into Nashville where you have family or friends coming in or business, or if you're heading out, you need to know what's going on. We have a reporter at the airport right now. Kristen Priesall's been there since this crisis has started, a potential terrorist attack here. Kristen, what can you tell us right now for people moving in and out of the airport?
Lydia, everything seems to be running very smoothly right now. I am at Nashville International Airport. All of the airplanes are grounded at this time. Other flights are making their way to Nashville. Any plane
looks more than a single aircraft just exploding on the ground. But again, we don't know precisely the size of the aircraft. We won't speculate on that. But Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us, confirms that it was American Flight 11 to Los Angeles. There were 90 passengers and crew on board. And there was a second plane. Help me understand this now. So we believe that the two aircraft have flown into the trade towers. Both belonged to American Airlines, and they had both been hijacked. And there were 90 passengers and crew on the first plane and 60 passengers and crew on the second plane. That is if there's any doubt about that, someone please contradict me, but that is the report I am getting from our people who cover the Federal Aviation Administration and air travel in general, that there were two aircraft hijacked for this attack.
Who, as soon as they got the report, went running into the building, and we were herded away. But they have set up an alternative command site somewhere in the area. The Pentagon has set up a crisis team to deal with this situation. But so far, the latest reports are that another plane of some kind may have been hijacked and headed in this direction. Katie?
Yeah, we also should tell you, Mick, this is Tom Brokaw, that the FAA now says that all international flights headed for the United States are being diverted to Canada. This at a time when, as Jim Mikulashevsky is telling us, there's an unconfirmed report that there's been another hijacking. All takeoffs were stopped, but there were planes in the air, obviously, at the time of these first two attacks on the Twin Trade Towers and then on the Pentagon.
Andrea Mitchell is standing by with more information. She was at the State Department. Andrea?
The State Department, as you know, has been evacuated. Secretary of State Colin Powell is now en route home from Lima, Peru. He did not get to his destination of Bogota, Colombia today, so that trip canceled. He, as all other officials, heading back. State Department officials and the White House officials and the NSC have all been evacuated as well, although Condi Rice was...
Back it up! Back it up! All right, here we go again. Here we go again. I don't know what's going on, but the second building is collapsing, I believe. I don't know. I don't know, but this happened before. We saw the same thing happen before, where the first building collapsed and there was a lot of smoke and flames. Just back up. Come on, just back up. Come on. Come over this way, Pat. Fine, we will. We can see the top of the building from here. Oh, yeah. Oh, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes. There it goes. Oh. When it comes down, we're... All right. We do need to put it down now. I think we need to put it down now. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching history unfold. The second World Trade Center tower has collapsed in Lower Manhattan. They are no more. This, the finale of perhaps the worst, undoubtedly, the worst terrorist attack ever to occur in the world's history. The smoke and debris from this collapse undoubtedly causing yet more mayhem, more death, more destruction, as the smoke and debris spread through the streets of Lower Manhattan up into Midtown Manhattan.
Pat, can you hear us? Obviously, there is pandemonium.
Collapsing.
There is simply no...
There you see. I don't understand, and I would be
of what appears to be a coordinated.
And there were huge numbers of
ever had, indeed that the nation has had, the World Trade Centers. They exist no more. This on a day unlike any other day this nation has seen. The nation itself, we should emphasize, is in a lockdown mode. All airports in the United States have been closed after the planes have been set down in the nearest airports. The smoke from the debris of this collapse of these two trademarks of Manhattan spreading throughout Manhattan, as we see there on the lower portion of your screen, the Statue of Liberty looking out on the destruction in the lower portion of Manhattan. Undoubtedly a sight that statue has never seen before, indeed one that the United States has never seen before. We should emphasize that this devastation has not been limited to Manhattan. The United States Pentagon inside the Beltway in Washington, actually right outside the Beltway, but the Pentagon has been attacked as well. We don't know precisely what the mechanism of that attack was, but we do know that a portion of the Pentagon building has collapsed. We also know that apparently a car bomb has struck. These are shots earlier. A car bomb has struck outside of the State Department inside in Washington, D.C. We don't know the results of that devastation. We now are getting very vague, and we should emphasize these are very preliminary reports of exactly who was responsible for this obviously extremely carefully planned terrorist event taking place all over the United States, all over the northeast portion of the United States. A nation called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine is claiming credit. We should also mention, however, that the Israeli government believes that Osama bin Laden is responsible. The two organizations are related, but they are not the same. That is, they have helped each other in the past, but they are not the same organization. Once again, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the area of operation for this group is Syria, Lebanon, and Israeli-occupied territories, has claimed responsibility and credit for the devastation occurring in the northeast quadrant of the United States today. The United States is a country under siege by this organization and, according to the Israeli government, by Osama bin Laden as well, a name familiar to those who know about terrorist attacks. He being based, we believe, in Afghanistan, supported by members of the government there and by others, although he having hundreds of millions of dollars from his relatives in Saudi Arabia, he being a distant member of the royal family of Saudi Arabia, and therefore had the money to organize and support his terrorist operations. This, according to the Israeli government, but Fox News has learned, according to our own intelligence sources.
The World Trade Center a little before 9 a.m. Then, as we watch now this picture, a second plane slammed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. That tower collapsed first. It burned for a while and then collapsed. And you can see these pictures as that tower collapses. Not long ago, the second of the two towers collapsed. Now again, there are perhaps 50,000 people who work in these buildings on any given day. Not all of them would have been at work yet, but clearly a great and monumental loss of life. Also in Washington, the Pentagon has been under attack. At least one plane slammed into the Pentagon. David Schuster is an eyewitness to that and is joining us now. David?
John, the Pentagon is now being evacuated. You may be able to hear some of the sirens going off in the Pentagon. There's smoke billowing down the hallway. Eyewitnesses describe a U.S. Air 737 plane on what seemed to be headed towards National Airport at approximately 9:40 this morning when it then crashed into the south end of the Pentagon. The eyewitnesses describe a huge ball of fire, the plane apparently hitting by the helipad, which is near Highway 110 and Highway 395, the main arteries into the city. There have been unconfirmed reports of second explosions here at the Pentagon. We have not confirmed that, but again, the counterintelligence sources confirming that it was a commercial aircraft, apparently hijacked, that crashed into the Pentagon. The building has been evacuated. There are reports of safety precautions being taken at the Central Intelligence Agency, at the National Security Agency. Capitol Hill has been evacuated. The White House has been out of the Pentagon. Very quickly, you heard ambulances and fire trucks headed that direction. Chris Wright, our producer at the Pentagon, who is on the northern side of the Pentagon, says he could not hear the explosion or feel any aftershocks or anything. Obviously,
I managed to get inside an alcove building, and all the scaffolding around collapsed in front of me and broke the window next to me, and I climbed inside that and stayed in there for about 10 minutes. I couldn't get out of there. It was pitch black outside, and I haven't... hold on. I'm all right.
You're okay, John?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Actually, I'm being ushered out of here right now. They're sending me inside the building.
And who is doing that? Are police on the scene?
Hello?
John, are police on the scene? Who is moving you?
It was a New York City police officer, and he's just sort of gone on his way and left me now. So I'm the only one on the street at the moment.
You're the only one on the street. Well, John, obviously get to a safe place, but tell us, is the smoke starting to clear? Are you able to see anything more at this point? And John, hold on right there. Thank you.
Let's go to NBC's Pat Dawson, who is downtown. Let's listen.
Who were trying to run past us. In fact, our cameraman even put one of the captains in his car and drove him down to a command post. The people who you see here are pretty much all emergency workers. Many of them that I have seen in the last 2 to 3 minutes, quite frankly, are coming out of here. And remember this, these are professionals. They're coming out of there looking literally stunned, in shock, many of them, struggling for breath, obviously in serious distress. Breathing problems are the biggest problem for those who manage to make it safely out of that area down below us. You can't see much more than a block south of me right now. And the World Trade Center probably stands about 10 blocks south of where I am at this moment. And as you can see now, the dust is beginning to pick up here. It really depends on which way the wind blows as to whether or not we get heavy dust or not. But at this point, I can tell you that in the first few minutes, emergency workers were trying just basically to get out of there, to survive. You could see that written in their faces. The situation was so desperate, they just wanted to get out of there. Now, many of them are beginning to regroup. A couple of them asked me where their commander might be. They're trying to get together and go back in there and try to take care of the people who obviously are in serious trouble. There's no other way to describe it. The language here, at times, if I slip into language which seems a little melodramatic, forgive me, but this is a circumstance which is very, very difficult to describe in many ways without sounding melodramatic. Certainly in more than 20 years of covering horrific events, this is something that I've never seen before. As we say, the emergency workers now beginning to try to gather themselves. Over there you can see a police emergency service unit. They're trying basically now to reestablish some kind of a safe perimeter. And many of the emergency workers basically just happy to be alive. Certainly that picture tells it all. Many of them just happy to be alive at this point.
And reacted swiftly, John.
Than I do, but part of the building appears to me, as I look at it, to have collapsed. That's the Pentagon. And those pictures are live at 10:40 Eastern Time this morning. We have a report now of a fourth explosion at the Trade Center, and Brian Palmer, CNN correspondent, is as close as he can get to the area. Brian, what can you tell us?
We are, in fact, as close as we can get. I'm not going to give you an exact time frame, but several minutes ago we were standing in front of the United States courthouse when we saw the second World Trade Center disappear from the skyline. It collapsed before our eyes, again, in a plume of ash and debris. People rushed north. We had a New York City Police Department officer here with us who witnessed the first collapse, but he actually had to dash off to duty. We've been watching people crying.
In Lower Manhattan, the scene of the chaos that you're watching unfold live. Ashley, what have you learned? What can you see?
I don't know how to describe this. I don't know what to tell you first, but when that building came down, we were a couple of blocks.
You all right?
And I'm fine, thank you. Are you okay?
Oh, the glass is coming in.
An incredible cloud of debris and smoke completely engulfed us. We couldn't breathe. We broke down the door to a building just to get out from the cloud. We couldn't breathe.
No one there.
Thank you. No, we couldn't breathe. We couldn't see. It was pitch black. Just going into a corner restaurant, just allowing us. And it was as though I swear I've never seen anything like it.
Every time we hear a plane coming up overhead, it gets a little nervous where we are. Whatever is happening and whoever is responsible, we have no way of knowing if it's played out yet or if it's just going on. So every time we hear a plane go by, we wonder what the situation is and where it is headed. That sound, we're told by a person here, they believe that is a fighter jet. Federal office buildings around the country.
Not too long ago, it appears, Brian told us that that there was a report of a hijacked plane south of Washington, D.C. and headed toward the nation's capital. Now, it appears that that is the flight that went down about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. We told you that there was a confirmation from the Somerset County Airport. Authorities are saying that that may be the plane that Brian Wilson spoke of. Let's take you back again to New York and an absolutely horrific scene in lower Manhattan. The entire lower end of the island covered in smoke and floating debris. And what's missing? The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, 110 stories high. You are looking at the pictures from, the last half hour or so as the first tower simply collapsed on itself. This, and look at the debris raining down on other buildings. Imagine the horror. Now, here comes the second tower. This is the one that had the TV antenna on top, simply imploding on itself. 110 stories, the workplace of some 50,000 people. America, the loss of life here is going to be tremendous. Molly Falconer is at one of the New York area hospitals. Molly, it's got to be a scene of absolute chaos there.
John, this is an area under siege. The police have blocked off a block radius around one of the main hospitals here in New York, and paramedics are coming out onto the street asking people in the crowd to give blood. I'm sorry, the phone line's been going in and out, but they're asking people in the crowd to give blood to the people who are coming into this hospital. There are stretchers out on the streets on dollies draped in white sheets waiting for the injured to come in. I've seen ambulance after ambulance ferrying people into this hospital. It is a scene of utter chaos. The police have locked down this block. They're trying to keep people away, but people are standing at the barricade trying to find out who's inside this hospital. As far as we know, most of the burn victims are going up to Cornell Hospital. Some are going to Bellevue, but the majority are going here to St. Vincent's Hospital because they have a trauma one-level center here that is to take care of the worst of the victims who are coming in. Sirens just keep going fast, and the crowds are just getting heavier. Most of the people here can also see the World Trade Center, both of the towers. We heard the crowds, watched them come down. People are in tears. They shouted watching the second tower come down, and now all we can see is way downtown billows of black and gray smoke while the sirens here just keep coming into the hospital. John, we'll keep you up to date.
All right, Molly Falconer, thanks very much. And that is perhaps something that you can do if you are watching our coverage anywhere in America. Donating blood is going to be very urgent today. The New York area hospitals are going to be swamped, and New York City itself may not be the place to try to do it. But anywhere in America, if you can donate blood, I think it will be helpful. Now, we are once again trying to find out exactly what happened in western Pennsylvania, where a plane went down, a large plane went down just north of the airport, the Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. These live pictures on your screen now show you the scene in lower Manhattan, where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center essentially are gone. We have with us on the phone another former Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger. Mr. Weinberger, it's good of you to join us. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
How should, you know how Washington works. What should be happening right now?
Well, I think probably what is happening, that is the city is virtually shutting down. You see police and little knots in all the corners, and all the police cars are out of the police stations. And every available fire engine is moving toward the Pentagon, and I suppose there are going to be other targets where they'll have to go to too. The rumors are floating all over the place, and it's generally a real siege situation. It's very much as if the whole city were under attack, whereas probably it's the 2 or 3 principal targets. But the cumulative effect is that of a city under siege.
Have you ever planned for this kind of an attack in your experience at the Pentagon?
The attempt is to plan for everything, and there were always various discussions of what form an attack could take. Most likely one was a suicide car bomb or a bus or some heavy vehicle being driven up to the Pentagon, as happened in Beirut and in various other places. I think an aerial attack was considered not one of the things you heavily planned against. On the other hand, the city is ringed with Air Force bases and Navy bases, and the ability to get defensive planes in the air is very, very high, and at the same time you would do what is being done, and that is closing off the entire airspace so that you, in effect, the whole Washington area is a no-fly zone, so that any planes that can't identify themselves and get into that are to be shot down. And those are the orders. That was basically the response that was always contemplated, but nothing on this scale was ever contemplated.
You know that there are going to be cries for revenge, for a response. Can America respond immediately, and if so, how?
Well, the response has to be a response that is targeted at the people who did it. But there will undoubtedly be cries for revenge, and it's the slightest confirmation of who did it or where it came from. These will be pursued. The loss of life has to be absolutely staggering, because the 2 twin towers at the Trade Center, there was not time to get them evacuated, and they're both down, and the opportunities are tremendous. Now, of course, they've evacuated the principal targets, the White House and the Capitol building, and various other points in the city. But certainly there'll be calls for revenge, and it's important that we identify the people who did it, and that they be destroyed as quickly as possible. And that's a proper response.
All right. Secretary Caspar Weinberger, former Secretary of Defense, thanks very much for being with us. Just this word, one of our producers in Afghanistan has spoken with the Taliban, the titular government of Afghanistan, I should say. The Taliban denies any responsibility. Now, that is not to say that the Taliban speaks for Osama bin Laden, but the Taliban, the government or would-be government, not recognized yet by the United States as the government of Afghanistan, is denying any complicity or any responsibility for these attacks.
Well, clearly, some terrorist experts that I've spoken to this morning say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has had pilots, although these apparently may be at least 2 hijackings, but he has had pilots on his payroll. 3 of the of alleged conspirators who were involved in the East African bombing trial here in New York had pilots' licenses. Not to say that that's what happened here, but they seem to indicate that this would have that signature. And John, I'm hearing a figure of 10,000 here in New York City, perhaps for casualties on the World Trade Center.
And it could go higher than that. Britt Hume, our managing editor, is in Washington, D.C. Britt, what are you hearing there?
Well, you're seeing, John, that live picture from our station, WTTG, of the smoke and dust still coming from the Pentagon. And what we now understand is the case is in the place where that plane hit. We believe it now to have been a 737 commercial flight coming in. The walls of the the wall of the building, the outer wall of the building, and of course that building, as you know, is a series of concentric rings, so that when you hit the outer wall of the building, you're only affecting really that part of it, but that those walls are down, and you can see the gutted areas inside, damage in that particular part of that very large building, very extensive indeed. In addition, there was an earlier broadcast report here in Washington that there'd been a car bomb outside the State Department. Terry Mary Schultz, our reporter at the State Department, has talked to senior officials who say that that is not true. The State Department has, however, been evacuated, as has the Justice Department, national monuments, and all other major public buildings in Washington in terms of absolute.
Puts it below the 119 level of the yen. Now, obviously, the financial reaction to this situation is being felt. It is obviously not the primary story, certainly. However, we want to keep you abreast of that because one of the targets was the financial district here in the United States with the World Trade Center, both towers now having collapsed.
And as a precautionary measure, you see there on the lower third screen that they have evacuated the airports in Boston and Pittsburgh. Around the Pittsburgh area there, the plane crashed there of about 45 minutes ago, and then out of Boston, we know the FBI has told us that it was an American Airlines flight out of Boston that was bound for Los Angeles. It was hijacked. One of the planes that actually ran into the World Trade Center tower.
And earlier this morning, if you're just joining us, a quick recap if you're tuning in from the West Coast. It was just about 9 a.m. When the first attack occurred on the World Trade Center. A plane went into the World Trade Center. Then about 18 minutes after that, a second plane went in. Site, obviously. Both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. Trading in the United States has been suspended. The dollar is falling against the major foreign currencies, specifically against the Japanese yen. We have had an attack on the Pentagon. We have words that now, according to NBC News, the top anti-terror officials are moving to the State Department Training Center, which is located in Arlington, Virginia, that the State Department is evacuating right now, and they are moving all key personnel to the State Department Training Center, that according to NBC News. Bill?
We're getting word of other stock exchanges around the world. According to what I'm just hearing is they've reopened trading in Mexico in the stock market there. And I'm getting word that all federal buildings have been evacuated in Washington. We're looking at a picture of the Pentagon right now. We're getting some live pictures for the first time, a close-up of the Pentagon complex there, which it was roughly an hour after.
Man, I don't know if he's in total complete daze. Some
deliberate terrorist attack on the United States, as Tom has put it so far this morning. This is a declaration of war by terrorists against the United States.
And of course, we should mention, by the way, Tom, before we talk about terrorism, that another large plane crashed as well, just north of Somerset County Airport, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a Boeing 767 that crashed around 10 o'clock this morning, and it is unclear whether the crash was related to the other crashes that took place this morning.
President Bush is en route back to Washington. The State Department has been evacuated. There's been that attack on the Pentagon. That has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. There will be an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. This is the most serious attack on the United States since Pearl Harbor. There has never been a terrorist attack of this magnitude, in fact, on any country in the world so far as we can tell. The untold loss of life in New York alone. We only know that there have been hundreds of burn victims brought to various hospitals. Both Twin Trade Tower centers have collapsed to the ground. That's a densely populated area, obviously. We don't know the number of casualties yet at the Pentagon, and we don't know the number of deaths in that plane that went down, as Katie pointed, north of Pittsburgh.
And what we've left out a piece of information, and we know for a fact that one of these planes that was crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked from Boston this morning. It was American Airlines Flight 11 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. We had reports that it had been diverted to JFK, and a short time later, perhaps while feigning a landing at JFK, it veered dramatically into the World Trade Center.
All air travel has been stopped. Airports have been closed across the country to planes departing. In terms of planes that are en route, it is unclear if they've made emergency landings or if they're reaching their final destinations. The White House has been evacuated, the State Department, the CIA has been evacuated. Of course, many, many buildings in Manhattan and Lower Manhattan have been evacuated as well.
And transatlantic flights to this country are being diverted to Canada. Still, no claim of responsibility that is verifiable or credible at this time. Yasser Arafat has condemned this attack, saying it's shocking and appalling.
Of course, we should mention back in February of 1993 was when that bomb went off in the garage of the World Trade Center, killing 6 people, injuring 1,000 people. And that, of course, was an unbelievable scene. But
I believe had been hijacked and flew into a building, hit a building. And then shortly after that, that was at 9 o'clock, or just after it showed up on the wire services about 9:04. We could see it happen live on television as a second aircraft hit the other tower of the twin trade towers in New York City. Thousands of people had just arrived at work. As time passed, we understood that these aircraft had been, we believed, hijacked in both instances. Perhaps certainly one, an American Airlines aircraft which is destined for Los Angeles, had been hijacked and flown. Pilot either forced to fly, very hard to believe, and of course we'll never know unless they find the black boxes from these aircraft, or somebody on board that aircraft killed or got rid of the pilot and went to the controls and flew the plane into the building themselves. And then as much of the country began to connect and try to grapple with this, then we had this horrifying circumstances of first one of the towers, this is the second aircraft flying in, then first one of the towers and two, and then the other tower collapsing on itself with, at the very least, hundreds and probably thousands of people who did not manage to get out of the building after the two initial collisions. And the country, the political and military establishment of the country just began to lock down very quickly. First of all, there was concern at the White House because outside the west side of the White House, behind the Executive Office building, we then began to see that there was fire, and that was what appears now to have been an attack on the Pentagon. Just shortly thereafter, this was this other tower of the Pentagon, the first tower of the Pentagon, which began to fall down upon itself. The World Trade Centers, of course, is what I mean. Thank you. Just stay out of my ear for a second. I'm trying to bring people up to date on the order of which things happened. So we then had New York City's airspace all around locked down. The airports closed down at LaGuardia and Newark and John F. Kennedy. Nobody was allowed to take off. And then shortly after that, the Federal Aviation Administration became involved and told aircraft nowhere in the country to take off. And then all aircraft flying anywhere in the country, because there was so much concern, and there is still some, that there is an aircraft somewhere out in the country which has been unaccounted for. All aircraft in the country were ordered to land immediately at the nearest airport. And then, of course, the second devastating thing at the trade towers themselves, when the second trade tower collapsed on itself. The president was in Florida, and the president, down in Florida today to talk about education, came very quickly to the cameras, clearly as shocked as any of us in the rest of the country. He talked to the
Absolutely no planes taking off here at the Westchester County Airport. Some folks coming here to pick up their loved ones. We saw many people getting off the planes. One woman told me she went on the plane, she was ready to take off to LA, and then the plane was actually evacuated. So it appears even this airport is on terrorist alert. I'm not sure what could possibly happen, what nightmare might happen. So everyone is being very cautious here. There are still some people, you can see people coming behind me.
In addition, John, there was there was a report, I should say, kicking around on the air of an attack on Camp David, the presidential retreat north of Washington. Senior officials in the administration are saying that that is not true. So that's where that matter stands. Back to you, John.
Britt Hume, thanks for the updated information. Yeah, it bears repeating. There will be a lot of rumors, a lot of panic swirling around today. Whatever you can do to stay calm, gather your loved ones around them and just give them a hug is certainly is advice that I think is worth taking. There is clearly a catastrophic loss of life in the World Trade Center itself. Let's get an update now from our Rita Cosby, who is in the Washington, D.C. area. Rita, what have you found out?
Well, John, I just wanted to let you know I've been talking to FAA officials, and they are saying that they keep getting repeated reports of possible hijackings. Obviously, as you said, this is still very early on, but they're getting a lot of different calls from throughout the country. One report from Chicago, they're looking into the crash in Pennsylvania, which was a 767, a wide-body plane. They don't know if that is related or not, but they're getting numerous calls. It's obviously flooded. They said at this point, normally at this time of day, there are typically 4,000 aircraft aloft in the United States. These are international, domestic flights, a variety of ones, and these include military planes as well as private and commercial aircraft. At this point, there are only just a few hundred at this point because they have ordered a national ground stop as of 2 hours ago. It's the first time in U.S. history that they have ordered all U.S. planes to be grounded immediately. International flights are being diverted to Canada, and the ones that are domestic are being ordered to reach their destination as soon as possible. There are 450 airports in the U.S. that have control towers, and all of them have been told to alert their planes to hurry up and get in.
Rita, I want to go to Shepard Smith, who's on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Shepard?
And know if you guys know about these fighter jets. Have we already reported on the fighter jets that are flying now?
There are fighter jets, we understand, flying over Washington, D.C. Shepard Smith, again, is not able to hear me, but he is on the building roof of our building here in Midtown Manhattan and says that fighter jets are circling Manhattan.
We're standing back again on the roof of 1211 Avenue of the Americas at the Fox News headquarters, and we're watching as two fighter jets circle what is lower Manhattan at quite an altitude. Peter Blangiforti is an engineer who's up here, and he was first to see them pretty high up, I guess.
Very high up they were, and I saw one in this direction, and it went down around by the World Trade Centers, and then I saw another one coming from the opposite direction, and we lost track of that one. But they seemed to look like fighter jets, but they were flying very high.
Yeah, we can only assume that this is part of the security that's now gone into place. John, you saw the world. You were up here setting up. Yes. John McKay was up here setting up for this live shot when the first of the World Trade Centers fell. Tell me what was going on.
Couldn't believe it. Peter just said the tower just fell, and we were working and turned and looked. And
if we were looking from here, it would be the tower on our left side.
Yeah, the east one. Yeah, it just went into a huge cloud of smoke and dust.
So you're watching, and then how long before the next tower?
About 10 minutes, I would say. We were just busy working and just, butterflies in their stomachs and just can't believe it's all happening. And then the next thing we know, we turn around, the other one's going.
Peter Blangiforti was explaining how the noise and the way it came across the city.
It seemed to have rumbled almost as if there was another large aircraft flying overhead, but really I think it was the collapse of the building, the volume of the explosion just coming across, just sound waves coming across the city.
The sound waves making their way up from lower Manhattan into the Flatiron District and up into Midtown, coming like a jet flying right overhead, I think is how you described it.
Yeah, just the rumblings of a jet sound almost, but it sounded more like a deep rumbling, probably from the explosion of the collapse.
It probably goes without saying at this point, as we pan back down to where the World Trade Center stood just a couple of hours ago, that communications in this city have become very difficult. There are people all over the world, no doubt, who knew people who were inside those two buildings. Some of the facts as they stack up, there are positives in all of this. In the first place, the first plane to crash allowed time for so many people, we would pray, to get out of those two buildings. And certainly before the collapse happened, there was time for a number of people to get away. If you are considering or trying at this moment to make a phone call into the New York City area or the Washington area, it's time for the good of the country to put the phone down and wait and rely on mass communications, because the people who are constructing what will be an enormous security situation now need as many lines as humanly possible. We don't have telephone lines on top. Our cell phones no longer get out. In the minutes after the first plane crashed, the phone began ringing at my house. It's the office, it's your mother, it's your father, it's your brother, it's your girlfriend. The phone lines immediately jammed throughout the city. There is a plea now for people around the world who may be watching not to use the telecommunication systems at this moment, because the people who are mounting this rescue effort need it. It was described by Peter Blangiforti as others as a collapse around a pole which stood. Peter, you were describing what looked like maybe a big support column. You can keep the camera down there. You were describing still seeing something before the smoke rose.
Before the smoke rose with the second tower, when it collapsed, you just saw it almost as if one of the large girders or beams was going straight through the building and was the only thing left standing like a toothpick. And eventually that dropped too before the smoke engulfed everything else. But it was just a very strange, surreal sight.
Well, there are certainly reports from all over the city of what it was like in the minutes after the two towers were struck. Radio reports in the cab on the way here from reporters who were watching, people literally jumping out of buildings. Certainly there was a massive fire and smoke on many different floors of the building. The size of the jet would lead us to believe certainly that a number of floors were wiped out almost immediately. And then the chaos to try and get out of that building. But certainly there will be stories of miracles as we go through all of this. And those people who were in that building and after the first explosion happened and the first crash happened, word of people who got out. I was listening on the radio, broadcasting live just about an hour ago to a woman who was in the second tower to be hit. She was able to walk down 92 floors in what she described to be a pretty controlled situation. 92 floors down the west tower of the building. She was able to walk without any chaos to give a radio report live. It's my understanding that literally thousands of people in the time before the two towers collapsed were able to make their way away from that area. Mass transit was certainly down at the time, but it's a quick walk to get out of that area. They had, what, a good 45 minutes, Ann Woolsey, to begin to make their way to the north. In Midtown right now, I was looking over this building and down into, in fact, I'm doing so right now. I'm looking down onto 47th Street, right below us. This to my right here, no, you don't have to, you can't see it from there, I don't believe. Maybe you can see Times Square over here. You can't. This is Times Square right below me. This is a scene right now at 11:15 in the morning, at 11:15, when this would be a sea of tourists on a spectacular day in Manhattan, and instead sirens echo across Manhattan, and that is the TKTS stand. I believe you're looking at that now. You're not able to see that, are you? The TKTS stand, can you see it on the lens? We can't. Pan back down to where the World Trade Center
numb shock all over this city and all across America. If you're watching us now, you're looking at the lower end of Manhattan where the World Trade Center once stood. It is gone this morning, obliterated after two strikes in coordinated attacks from airliners, one of them apparently hijacked from American Airlines. We are going to be getting a news conference from American Airlines in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, an Arabic newspaper, a fairly authoritative source, the editor of that London-based newspaper, says Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born, now exiled to Afghanistan rebel leader, Osama bin Laden, according to this newspaper editor, warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests, and he promised a very big one. Now, we cannot yet attribute this to Osama bin Laden. However, that was the promise from this fairly authoritative London newspaper.
Well, John, certainly sources that I have talked to this morning, terrorist experts say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has the money, the network, the ability to carry out this type of coordinated attack. And let me point out that in the East African bombing terrorist trial here in New York City of the bombing of the two embassies in East Africa, that 3 of the alleged co-conspirators, one is now in jail, 2 are in jail, one's in jail, 2 cooperated for the United States government at the trial. They had pilot's licenses, and they can fly airplanes. So I'm sure investigators right now are trying to figure out a possible scenario. Were these planes hijacked by bin Laden people? Did they rush up to the cockpit? You don't need a gun. You burst in, several of them, and strangle the pilots or something, and then take over the controls of an airplane near the last minute while you're flying, and divert the plane and smash it right into the World Trade Center towers or in the Pentagon. Clearly, that is a scenario that I would think that investigators are trying to go on right now to try and figure out exactly what happened, who is responsible for this horrible act. And I also think that we have now entered a new era, clearly a day of infamy, that we are not in this country clearly immune.
September 11th, 2001. You're going to remember this day for a long time, and a lot of things in this country will change as a result of what you're seeing on your screen now. Not all of the chaos, perhaps the worst of it in terms of loss of life, but not all of the chaos is taking place in Manhattan. Washington, D.C. also has been under attack. U.S. airplane apparently hijacked as well, slamming into the outside wall of the outer ring of the Pentagon. Our David Schuster is there and has an update for us. David?
John, we have the eyewitnesses describing it as a U.S. airplane at approximately 9:40 this morning approaching National Airport from a strange approach. The eyewitnesses claiming that it then slammed into the south side of the Pentagon. We've just spoken with a U.S. Air spokesperson, Rick Weintraub, who says that all of their aircraft, commercial aircraft, have been accounted for, and says that they are unaware of any one of their planes involved in this incident. So this may be a case of an eyewitness misreading the markings on the plane, but we can confirm for you that there is a large gaping 50-foot hole on the E-ring of the south side of the Pentagon near the helipad. We're getting reports from the Arlington, formerly Arlington Hospital, which is now an Ananova Hospital, that injured are being taken there. The Pentagon has been evacuated. The smoke is still pretty thick here in the Pentagon, even on our side, the north side of the Pentagon. And most of the 23,000 employees here at the Pentagon have been evacuated. But again, we do not have confirmation on the which commercial airliner may have been involved in this particular incident at the Pentagon. U.S. Air says that it was not one of their aircraft, that perhaps the red markings that an eyewitness saw might belong to American or Southwest, or American or one of the commuter airlines that fly in a national airport, which is just a few miles away. But again, we are confirming that an counterintelligence source is confirming that it was a commercial aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon this morning. There's no indication yet on the number of injuries or those killed. Some initial reports are that some Arlington hospitals are being flooded with injuries. There were dozens of fire trucks and ambulances that were streaking towards the Pentagon at approximately
now to go north and get out of the way. Officer, do you have any idea of what the problem is?
There's a report of a secondary device possibly in the area of this school, so they're going to move everybody back as a precaution.
Secondary device meaning a bomb?
Possibly.
Okay, and where did that report come from? Was it called in?
It came in over our radios, and it's reported through our supervisors on down, so we're pulling everybody back.
And that's in the Stuyvesant High School right there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Officer McQuaid. That's Officer McQuaid of New York City Emergency Service. I'm sorry, what's it?
We are going to take it back here at CNBC, Bill Griffith, along with Sue Herrera. A few more bits of information that we're getting. Obviously, we'll go back to MSNBC on the ground there in New York City as developments warrant it. Let me bring a couple things in. Sue, you have some things as well.
I do. As a matter of fact, the FBI is now saying that the 4 hijacked planes were American Airlines flight number 11 and 77 and United Airlines flight number 175 and 93. And Scott
Wapner has more developments on one of those hijacked flights.
Well, let's also look at some passenger counts from those planes. American Airlines Flight 11 was one of the ones believed to have crashed into the World Trade Center. We believe that was a Boeing 767 with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. American Airlines Flight 77 was believed to be en route from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, a Boeing 757 with 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. United Flight 175, there is no information at this time as to how many passengers were on board. The other United plane involved, number 93, was believed to be en route from Newark to San Francisco. And this could be the plane. This is believed to be the plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh. And we understand that about 9:58 Eastern Time, this is being reported by WPXI television in Pittsburgh, that a 911 center got a phone call from a cell phone from the plane saying, in fact, that the plane was hijacked. There was an explosion, a cloud of white smoke, and of course, the phone then went dead.
And Scott, before we go to Leslie LaRoche, our correspondent in London, U.S. officials are telling NBC News that the U.S. Army units have been placed on their highest state of alert. That would be ThreatCon Delta for protection purposes. This means armed troops and armored vehicles will be protecting U.S. bases and facilities throughout Europe, and we are going to get more on that as it develops. That from NBC News from U.S. officials.
Sue, let me mention that in about 5 minutes, the Afghani ambassador representing the Taliban government is going to hold a news conference. Sources in Afghanistan say that they will deny any link or knowledge that known terrorist Osama bin Laden would be involved And as far as they are concerned, he is banned from carrying out activities against anyone. Now, we should take this with a huge grain of salt, because there are administration officials who are saying that if we are to believe that this is a coordinated attack, and there really is no reason to believe it isn't, given the timing of all of this today, that administration officials are saying that it should be considered a coordinated attack on the scale that an organization put together by Osama bin Laden would be capable of carrying out, if in fact that's what this is.
American Airlines is now making a statement saying that it did officially lose 2 aircraft carrying a total of 156 people. We updated you on those flight numbers earlier. We should also note that Manhattan is basically, entrance into Manhattan is basically shut down. All
work into the area. What they're doing now, Lester, is lining up on some of the adjacent streets and setting up, as what you know from covering stories like this, field forces, where they tell them, don't go out and freelance, don't go out on your own, stay in a group, we'll move into an area and we'll somehow move in little by little. Meanwhile, firefighters and rescue officials, I just saw them come in as well,
Room 55,
and they
please.
had what appeared to be picks, axes, and other devices that they're going to be using perhaps to try and extract.
Which appeared to be a 737 or small Airbus, a twin-engine jet, flying very low south downtown over 5th Avenue. I was right near Rockefeller Center. Everybody was looking up, saying it's kind of unusual, and then it banked right. Banking right would indicate it was heading right toward the World Trade Center, and it disappeared from my view. And then heard the report that, though, is a common airway from the north. That plane, if that indeed was the American Airlines plane from Boston, that would make sense. Coming from the north, coming from Boston, on the air route to make a left leg base, and then your final into LaGuardia, but then at the last moment diverted into this horrible, horrible catastrophe.
There will be apparently no news conference from American Airlines, but Mike Tobin, our correspondent, has a statement from the airline. Mike, can you bring it to us?
Yeah, the statement is this. I'll read it verbatim to you. American Airlines confirmed today that it lost 2 aircraft in tragic incidents this morning. American said the flights were Flight 11, a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots, and Flight 77, a Boeing 757 operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. The statement further reads, because of the heightened security due to the nature of today's events, American said it is working closely with U.S. government authorities and will not release more information at this time. The government has shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. American TWA, American Eagle, will not operate. And a statement from Donald J. Carty, Chairman and CEO of American Airlines, says we are horrified by these tragic events. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of all involved. And then it's got a note here about where media calls should be directed.
All right, Mike Tobin, thank you very much. Yeah, a 767, apparently, a wide-body plane capable of carrying very many more than the 81 on board, was one of those apparently hijacked. We're going to be getting an updated news conference from the security chief at Logan Airport in Boston shortly. Meantime, I want to take you down to Britt Hume, just to repeat, the nation's capital also under attack. Of a plane slamming into an outside wall of the Pentagon this morning. Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor, is there. Britt?
John, there are police sources that are saying we need to be very careful about this. There are police sources saying that there's a plane coming up the Potomac River at a high rate of speed. This would be consistent with earlier warnings that we'd heard from police sources here in Washington, not from federal government sources or from the military, that an airplane was some distance away and appeared to be headed toward the city. So that is something obviously we will watch with considerable urgency here. This may be a nation at this moment that it needs to hear from its government. The Secret Service is not saying exactly where the President of the United States is. We know that he left his event out of town and was headed, we now know not exactly where. We do know this, that there was a conference call this morning, presumably after the President was in the air, that was headed by the Vice President, Condoleezza Rice, other officials, and what is called the Federal Response Plan has been put in place. This was an emergency response plan for a variety of different kinds of disasters, floods, hurricanes, calamities of that kind. It involves 28 federal agencies led by the Justice Department. The Federal Emergency Management Agency coordinates on the President's behalf. Obviously, this is more of a disaster relief type of concern, but a terrorist attack response is part of what they do, and that plan is in place and is underway. Meantime, obviously, we continue to watch the horizon south of Washington to see if anything comes of these reports from police sources. We caution you, these are just police sources. We're not hearing this yet from any other federal source or from any intelligence sources or from the military. So we watch with somewhat bated breath, John.
Hume in Washington. Commerce in America is not exactly going to come to a grinding halt, but it is going to be significantly curtailed today. The markets, the stock market, the NASDAQ have not opened yet.
To strike and prevent further actions or in punitive retaliation.
Well, speaking of that, General Clark, wouldn't you agree there are very few of the terrorist groups, at least that we're familiar with, who would have the capability to pull off something this coordinated on this scale?
I think that's exactly right. There's only one group that has ever indicated that it has this kind of ability, and that's Osama bin Laden's. So obviously that'll be the first.
757, it was en route from Newark to San Francisco. I do not know how many people were on board that plane. Flight 175, it is a Boeing 767. It was scheduled from Boston to Los Angeles. That flight apparently is still unaccounted for, according to officials from United. So at least we believe there's at least one more plane that may still be flying around, in U.S. airspace. Obviously, Peter, I've also learned that one of the planes that went into the World Trade Tower was tracked by the FAA. They knew, I don't know if they knew it was hijacked or if they just knew something was wrong. Obviously, it had deviated from its flight path. They were able to track it on radar, and they did track it to lower Manhattan. That is the latest we know about the flight.
Lisa, this may seem an awfully dumb question, but given the fact that the airlines, the major airlines, operate in such an intensely coordinated way, at least with their own operation centers, how is United Flight 175, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, thought to be missing and unaccounted for?
Well, all United is saying is that they are, quote, concerned about that flight. What I believe is that probably that flight was hijacked as well. Where it is right now, I'm sure perhaps the FAA, the FBI, and those folks know where it is. We are not being told, but there may still be another plane flying out there that has not yet crashed or landed or whatever will happen to it. But that flight is apparently at least unaccounted for at this time as far as public release. I'm sure someone knows where that flight is.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much then. Lisa Stark in Seattle today. Thought she was in Washington, covers aviation for us. Barbara Starr, one of our principal reporters at the Pentagon, I think is on the line as well. Barbara? Barbara, do you hear me? Barbara Starr?
Yes, Peter, I'm standing outside the Pentagon. About 10 or 15 minutes ago, we saw 50 to 75 military personnel move onto the helipad. They are stretcher-bearer volunteers. They have been assembled to go in and recover any potentially dead or wounded. And we have talked to an eyewitness who was down on the helipad earlier this morning, where the fire is, of course, still ongoing. He reported,
due to the nature of today's event, American will not release more information at this time.
Mike, if I could just interrupt you, the big question at the moment is where Flight 77, the flight from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, is. Is there any reason to suspect that it was the plane that crashed 80 miles south of Pittsburgh today?
That has not been confirmed at all. All they are confirming right now are the two flights and no further information. And they've been very, very tight-lipped. There are a few workers from American Airlines down here and reluctant to confirm anything at this point.
Well, actually, Mike, I've just been corrected by a producer who suggests that the plane that crashed 80 miles south of Pittsburgh was actually a United Airlines flight. And that indeed, that still leaves question, because we know that the flight that crashed into the Pentagon, and we don't want to forget what happened in Washington today, where another plane, a 737, crashed in, causing partial collapse of the Pentagon, was a U.S. air flight. So again, that leaves the question, where is Flight 77?
Yeah, and at this point, all they're saying, they're confirming that they lost 2 aircraft, and they were.
That's where the impact was. But looking at the side of the building, you can see smoke and flames, and the building is singed, literally top to bottom. Water is continuing to be poured on the flames by fire companies.
Thank you, Barbara Starr, very much. We've just seen a helicopter flying over the center portion of the District of Columbia. Maybe we can get another glimpse at that. It's gone out of frame now. I am wondering now whether or not we are not possibly looking at the president returning to the White House. Claire Shipman, you've got a pretty decent vantage point over the White House. Is that possibly what we're looking at? Okay, Claire Shipman will get to us, but she's got a very good vantage point over the White House. It does not by any means look like the traditional arrival of the president from Andrews Air Force Base in a Marine helicopter on the south lawn of the White House. And quite frankly, everybody on the roof, with a few remaining people on the roof of the building now. This is a permanent guard. I think we're all in the country familiar with the fact that this is a permanent military installation on the top of the White House, as there is one of the really intense perimeters around that. But I think they would not have been quite so relaxed if the president was returning to the White House. And you heard John Cochran report from Florida a while ago that there is nobody's told him where the president is going to land on his way back. In fact, he does traditionally land at Andrews Air Force Base, and we have no idea precisely where he is going to land. And but there is no doubt at the moment that authorities are on alert from coast to coast still. All air traffic halted.
Where the highest-ranking officials are able to take off in the helicopter. At 10 a.m. then, just about 15 minutes after that, a 757 from United, number 93, crashed about 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, and that flight en route from
Pentagon. We are told by the FAA that that was the most restricted airspace that you can get. That was Class B airspace. It doesn't get any more restricted than that, so there should not have been any flights in the areas where those planes came down.
Patty, let me just ask you, the flight that United Airlines says it is, quote, deeply concerned about, the Boston to Los Angeles flight, are they confident that that is not one of the airliners that has already crashed?
United is not going beyond its statement at this point. They're just simply not.
So it's difficult to get people out of there in a quick and orderly fashion. And of course, the sub
says one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center towers was their Flight 11, hijacked from Boston on a flight to Los Angeles. Senior law enforcement officials also say a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington, D.C. So authorities are on alert from coast to coast, halting air traffic.
Happening across the United States. Government buildings in Washington are closed. There are a number of evacuations all across the country, building closings across the country, from the Space Needle in Seattle being closed as a precaution. Government buildings all across the country are on a state of high alert.
Fairly controlled chaos, actually. The halls were pretty packed, and we tried to exit in the area of the...
David Schuster reported that it could have happened at a worse point. It happened at a particular heliport that was adjacent to the Pentagon. Nevertheless, the destruction of a 737 careening and smashing into a building, even if it's feet or tens of feet away from the inner parts of the Pentagon, caused destruction. 5 floors, again, of the Pentagon apparently have collapsed, but the actual workings of the Pentagon going on, we should mention, very securely at the moment. The Pentagon has vast underground facilities that go far beyond the point at which even a 737 smashing into it could cause destruction. As we talked to Caspar Weinberger moments ago, former Defense Secretary, he's stressing that the United States Armed Forces is intact, is on a state of high alert. As our reporter Rick Leventhal was reporting on the ground in Lower Manhattan, he could hear Air Force or Navy jets flying overhead, securing the airspace above Manhattan to make sure that nothing else happens, nothing untoward. So once again, the Armed Forces of the United States is intact, is operating both within the Pentagon and in various facilities around the world. as we look at shots from earlier today of that second plane crash into the World Trade Center. And also, we should mention that the President of the United States is himself in a lockdown position, if you will. He is being guarded very carefully by the Secret Service. They will not report as to his exact location for obvious reasons, but he is safe. Our Commander-in-Chief is in good conditions. He is coordinating reactions to this. Now we have a press conference taking place in Logan Airport, which was the origination of one of the flights that smashed into the World Trade Center. Let's see if we can get that on air.
We've increased our security measures. We've shut down all the construction sites within Logan Airport, both airside and landside. And we've shut down all security checkpoints and removed all passengers who had been previously screened out into the non-secure part of the airport. We've activated our Family Assistance Center at the Hilton Hotel.
Coordinated attack doesn't even begin to describe it, Stephen Kristen.
All right, Stacey, I am on the internet now, and I looked up the DFPL. I had never heard of the DFPL Palestinian group, and I'll read you what I've got here.
Okay.
DFPL, yeah.
Okay.
It says it believes in the Marxist revolution and the class struggle within the Palestine movement. However, DFPL separated from the PFPL in 1969. DFPL thinks it's more realistic when compared to the other extreme groups. Additionally, DFPL is the first organization adopting the view that a Palestine state can be established on any territory saved from Israel, and that removing Israel should not be the ultimate goal of the Palestinians. And then it goes on. At any rate, this is a group that I haven't heard of before. The Democratic.
I had neither. That's great information.
The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. As Stacey Tisdale was just telling us, the DFPL, a Palestinian group, is now claiming responsibility for this series of terrorist attacks in the United States.
Here's some information from the United States Department of State. Something published in 1999 says the strength of the DFLP estimated at 500. I imagine that it would have to be a lot more to have an attack of quite this magnitude, so we'll continue to look into that.
Also, there were earlier reports that the Afghan government, this also, Stacey told us earlier, the Afghan government was calling a news conference, presumably now, to claim it had nothing to do with this, because Afghan has been harboring Osama bin Laden, who we're all familiar with as a well-known terrorist. But this apparently has to do with the Democratic Front of the Liberation of Palestine, at least according to that group.
Okay, we are going to go back to Washington, D.C. now, and Peter Barnes. Peter?
Yeah, more on that CH-53. It is called a Sea Dragon. It is a Navy helicopter. I want to clarify this. This now seen by Gary Nuremberg heading over the National Mall in the direction of the Pentagon. I don't want to sound trite talking about technology, but clearly in a time like this, but clearly now the military, the Pentagon planners are pulling out some of the most sophisticated technologies they've got to try to avert any further attacks on American, on U.S. federal buildings here, including the Pentagon in the Washington area. This Sea Dragon is a very sophisticated helicopter attack craft with radar, I assume also with equipped with missiles that could shoot down any approaching aircraft. On the Pentagon itself, I want to just update some of the information there on the facility. As you know, we know of at least one report of a plane hitting the Pentagon. The building is still on fire. I don't know if we've got that shot up still, but there are 26,000 military and civilian employees who work there and about 3,000 non-defense support personnel. The Pentagon sits on 34 acres of land, including the center court of 5 acres. It is big enough to, the site, the footprint is big enough to accommodate 5 U.S. Capitol buildings. It has 6.5 million square feet of space, has 17.5 miles of corridor, and I also was faxed some information on, believe it or not, emergency evacuation procedures. So I know that in the past the employees there have been put through numerous drills. The Pentagon, this material from the Pentagon itself, and you know,
the World Trade Center, and another smashed into the Pentagon. All of those buildings still disastrously involved in flames. All right, the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, and Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott have been taken to safe locations. Minority Leader, I should say. President Bush is also safe aboard Air Force One. The Secret Service will not say where he is for obvious security concerns. We're quite confident that when the president gets a chance, he will be making some kind of statement. But the president is safe The Secret Service is simply not saying where he is. Also, the Minority Leader of the Senate, Trent Lott, and House Speaker Denny Hastert, we know, have been taken to safe locations as well. Let's get an update on the situation in Manhattan. Molly Falconer is at St. Vincent's Hospital. Clearly there have been perhaps thousands of casualties today when those two towers came down. Molly, what can you tell us?
John, this is a hospital under siege. This block is under siege. Police have got the entire area blocked off with what looks like police barriers. So far, we have about 152 people who have come into this hospital. People are out in...
We lost communications with Molly Falconer. You can understand why. It is a chaotic day, and many of this city's and this nation's communications infrastructure, satellite dishes, television towers, and so forth, were located on top of the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center, both towers, are essentially gone now, a smoking pile of rubble. As you can see, that smoke column still billowing out of lower Manhattan. Rick Leventhal was in downtown Manhattan when the buildings came down and has an update for us from lower Manhattan. Rick?
Well, John, we're on Church Street at Reed Street, for those of you familiar with lower Manhattan, just a few blocks away from World Trade. Still thick black smoke billowing from the scene where both towers collapsed. Again, just a few blocks away from us. We were standing out here on Church Street when both towers came tumbling down, and each time there was a huge cloud of smoke and debris that came roaring down this street, and everyone literally ran for their lives. At this point, the police have been efforting to establish a perimeter. They're trying to keep people back and make sure that no one interferes with their job, which is to try and secure the area and then get inside that World Trade Center rubble to see whether or not they can locate any survivors who may have been inside the building or just outside the building when it came tumbling down. We want to bring in Mark Walsh, who's a freelancer for Fox. You live just a few blocks away and witnessed.
Dude, I live on the 43rd floor of a building which is 5 blocks from the World Trade Center itself. I witnessed the entire thing from beginning to end.
People talk about how it looked like a movie. I know when I came walking down here early this morning and saw both towers on fire and people on every street corner, it was like a movie, but you watched the planes hit the towers.
I was watching with my roommate. It was approximately several minutes after the first plane had hit. I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
Obviously, there were a lot of people inside the buildings at the time.
Two guys from the 7th precinct, the 1st precinct, the fire department right here, the 7th truck, those guys are all right there at ground zero when those things went down. And God bless, I know there's a lot of guys there that were around there, and hopefully they made it out.
What was happening around you and the streets around you as this was all going down?
Absolute pandemonium. From my viewpoint up 43 floors, I could see people running like ants, just absolutely scurrying for their lives. Billows of smoke coming through the streets, just walking down the street, just pushing everybody back. And then several minutes after, it looked like it had just snowed over the entire area.
Yeah, the debris, the soot was thick on the street. There's still a dusting of it out here, but when I was standing here and the towers collapsed, we saw police officers running for their lives, screaming, "Get back, get back, get back!" And I'll tell you, that's a wake-up call when you see cops running for their lives, and people too, women's pushing baby carriages, that sort of thing.
Well, you had the first tower first. That one, when that first went down, it just pushed everybody back, and it was a good 15 minutes before the second tower finally collapsed. Yeah. And it was just overwhelming, and by that point, it was just insane.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of similar stories from people who were inside the building. One gentleman we spoke to earlier today, John, was on the 77th floor and said it was a relatively orderly evacuation at that point after the first plane hit the first tower. Everyone going down the stairs, not a lot of panic. But when they got to the 6th floor, he says they felt a second shake, and then people started to really be concerned. Obviously, there were people in the building at the time of this, and some of those people, they haven't recovered them yet. And that's a big issue right now, is trying to get the rescue workers and the emergency crews to the building. There were police officers there and emergency crews there when this was all happening, and they were right at ground zero when it all went down. Can we talk to you? What's your role out here right now?
I'm just standing by right now. Can't say what role I'm playing right now.
Well, there's a lot of standing by. There's also concern that some of these other buildings might actually come down. this building right here with the glass that you see, the nearest tall building, that has structural damage as well. We saw a lot of glass broken out, and a corner of the building appeared to be in distress, and there's concern that there might actually be another collapse of that building. And I can also tell you that when we first got here, we were a few blocks up. We could actually see debris from one of the planes on the street, a huge gear at one point, looked like a piece of an engine at another point. So that debris is still littering that area up there. They had roped it off with police tape, and they had FBI agents out there, and that was just before the first tower came
to evacuate some of the floors in the building you were in. Yes, we did. Quick thinking of our forces there, decided to get everybody out as quick as possible after the first plane struck. That little lull period before the second one came helped us greatly in getting thousands of people out of one of our buildings. Did you actually see the plane strike the building? I saw the second plane strike the side of the building because I was outside evacuating.
Large operation, and what we don't know, in a way, is just how big it is. It seems that in each passing moment or so, we get another report of another incident, and our instinct tells us that they are all connected. We have a number of planes down, 2 American airline jets, 2 United jets down. We have a plane that hit the Pentagon.
Major General. Right now.
It's Melissa. I'm trying to find out what time we're going to do it.
Right now.
They're going to do this right now.
As soon as we get our batteries ready.
In its war against us. Meanwhile, Yasser Arafat emerged to speak with reporters ahead of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He said, "We are completely shocked. It's unbelievable. We completely condemn this very dangerous attack, and I convey my condolences to the American people, to the American president, and to the American administration, not only in my name, but on behalf of the Palestinian people."
And this comes on a day, Katie, in which obviously there's been a steady deterioration of the situation in the Middle East, but Shimon Peres was to meet today with Yasser Arafat on the West Bank. There has been some criticism of the Bush administration for not getting more involved in the peacemaking efforts in the Middle East.
Is to get President Bush back to the White House as soon as they believe it is safe. Now, there are both operational and political reasons for wanting to do that. The White House Situation Room, in the view of White House officials, is the best place from which to monitor events and direct any operations. And that is a fortified structure within the White House compound where we know the Vice President was when everyone else was evacuated from the premises earlier. Again, the Secret Service does not want to confirm for us for security reasons, or administration officials the same, tell us where those people are now, although I was told a short time ago the Vice President is still in a position to be monitoring and directing the response to these developments, and that the President, who is en route back to Washington, we're told Andrews Air Force Base is on full alert. I was also told that there are extra precautions that were taken to ensure the President's flight.
Well, Richard Myers, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that prior to the crash into the Pentagon, military officials had been notified that another hijacked plane had been heading from the New York area to Washington. The White House, the U.S. Capitol building, and other buildings have also been evacuated amid threats of terrorism. We have reports that troops have been deployed in our nation's capital in response to the attack. Meanwhile, a plane has crashed in Pennsylvania. Officials say it was a United Boeing 757. Flight 93 was en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco when it went down shortly after 10 a.m. Eastern Time near Somerset. That's about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The plane crashed shortly after an FAA order that any planes already in the air were to land at the nearest airport. It has not been confirmed if this fourth plane crash is related to the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. Following the attack on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the plane crashing into the Pentagon, evacuations have been ordered at the United Nations building in New York and the Sears Tower in Chicago. The Mall of America in Minnesota has also been evacuated. Security is being boosted at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, home to the Army's main germ warfare defense laboratory. The Federal Aviation Administration has ordered that airports nationwide halt all outbound flights. In Los Angeles, the police went on tactical alert and have mobilized an anti-terrorist division. President Bush is headed back to Washington from Florida, where he'd scheduled an educational event. Before he left for Washington, he spoke about the attacks.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
President Bush then held a moment of silence for whatever victims there may be from these acts. As a result of the likely terrorist attacks and threats, the FAA again has grounded all planes nationwide, and in New York, all bridges and tunnels have been closed. In 1993, the World Trade Center was the target of another terror attack. 6 people killed and more than 1,000 injured when a 1,200-pound bomb exploded in the parking garage of the Trade Center. 6 Islamic militants were convicted in the bombing and sentenced to life in prison. The reason behind the attack was to curb U.S. involvement in the Middle East. The building suffered more than $500 million in damage in that blast. The World Trade Center was the second tallest building in the world. The radical Islamic Jihad group has reportedly claimed responsibility for the attacks. The group sent a statement saying it was the result of the consequences of U.S. policy in the Middle East. Now to recap our top story. 2 airplanes crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City this morning. Both buildings collapse. A 3rd plane crashes into the nerve center of the Pentagon. That building took a direct hit and part of it collapsed. And a 4th passenger plane crashed into western Pennsylvania. Officials say we don't know who's doing it. Clearly they say it is terrorism related. We'll be right back.
Threat condition Delta, John, is the level at which the United States military goes to when it declares, or when the president declares, or when the military perceives an act of war. So the military is now at the same level that it would be if the United States was engaged in a war. But again, here at the Pentagon, while most of the employees of the Pentagon have been cleared from this building, there's still the National Military Command Center, which continues to operate in the base of the Pentagon, a secure bunker, if you will, in this Pentagon, which is, of course, built to withstand these sort of attacks. And while the smoke is pretty thick in our side of the building, we can tell you that at 9:40 this morning, when eyewitnesses described this jetliner slamming into the side of the Pentagon, that people here, including our own producer, said they did not hear or see anything. There were no shock waves. There was no sound. There was only a large plume of smoke. And then came the reports from inside the Pentagon that the Pentagon was on fire. And I can tell you at this point, the Pentagon is still on fire, that the fire has not been contained. It has spread to some of the inner rings of the Pentagon, as well as spreading along some of the outer rings. And again, just to report that the Atlantic Fleet, some of the military command and control are now at ThreatCon Delta. That is the largest threat level in the United States military. It's the threat level which the military goes to when it is engaged in a war. John, back to you.
All right, David Schuster reporting live from the Pentagon. Thank you. The question, of course, if America is in fact under attack, as it clearly is, how does the military respond? They are in that threat condition Delta, but no one knows where or how at this point to respond. Let's go to my colleague Shepard Smith, who has a bird's eye view of what's happening in Manhattan from Midtown. Shepard?
John, as you've been getting the updates from Washington and other places, we've been watching the streets of Manhattan. There is certainly concern of how people might react. And I can tell you that at this moment, the initial reaction was calm, and now Manhattan has taken on a whole new sort of flavor. I want to take this camera because I can't see what you see. I'm going to take the camera and show you around a bit as well as I can. We're going to begin. We're on the top of a building at 47th Street and 7th Avenue, or 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. This is 42nd Street. And you can see there was a lot of traffic in this street until a short time ago. But now you can see 42nd Street at the corner of Broadway has become a sort of sea of people. At this time of day, midday in Manhattan, this would normally be on a Tuesday afternoon, a very busy traffic area. It is not today. I'm going to pull out over here and take you, this is 47th Street. 47th Street panning now, going up towards 7th Avenue. Now, this avenue is northbound, as you can see, and traffic is pretty well gridlocked there. there's very little of it actually, and looking over toward the Hudson River, there's very little traffic across all of Manhattan. Now, we are looking right now over the Hudson River west in Manhattan, panning around now in the skyscrapers. This is where the World Trade Center stood, and down here is the TKTS building. This is another high traffic area in Midtown, an area with which most people who have ever visited New York would be quite familiar. This is the spot where you line up for Broadway tickets, and at this time of day, just after 12 o'clock, this would normally be a sea of literally thousands of people who are working their way around, getting their lunch and that sort of thing. You're looking live now in Times Square, a scene rarely repeated. Let's get back to this camera, because I'm going to pan down this street. When you're back on this camera, Bernie, let me know. And I'm going to pan down what is Broadway Avenue, making your way down. This would eventually take you all the way down to the financial district, panning across this building and back over to 42nd Street. I want to try to give you a look down the avenue toward what is the Diamond District. This is a little tricky, as you might imagine. This is the entrance to the Diamond District, right outside the Fox News studios. That would be the Diamond District, looking 47th Street now, all the way toward the East River. Absolutely no traffic in Manhattan today. Nothing. It initially started, cabs were running. I was able to get one about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Most of the cabs are no longer running, and the river crossings are now closed. All of Manhattan is shut down, and there is what was the World Trade Center. To say that there is chaos in the streets would be absolutely inaccurate. This is a city that prides itself on its ability to maintain amid the chaos, and that appears to be what's happening today. No violence in the streets, no problems to speak of, no incidents anywhere in Manhattan that I can tell you about. Certainly downtown would be a completely different story, but this city is not reacting in a violent way at all. There is calm here in Midtown, John, at least.
All right, Shepard Smith, thank you very much for that update. Of course, the World Trade Center, it sounds unbelievable to speak the words, but the World Trade Center is essentially gone, struck by two airplanes, apparently both of them hijacked. We are now getting a report, a confirmation from United Airlines that two of its planes are gone. One of them apparently the plane that crashed near Pittsburgh. But look here, this is the second plane that struck the World Trade Center shortly after 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. An earlier plane left the tower of smoke in the upper stories of the building on the right there. So both towers hit by planes, they burned for a while, and then one at a time, they both collapsed. We have an onlooker who gave us what is sort of a horrific description of what it all looked like, sounded like, and felt like. Let's hear from that person now.
I saw the building falling down.
Say that again, I didn't hear you.
I saw people jumping from the building, from the 100th floor, and I saw the building just coming down.
It is absolutely an appalling day, not only here in Manhattan, but also in Washington, where the Pentagon also was apparently the subject of a strike by one of these hijacked airliners, flying bombs, really. The Pentagon, in these pictures taken earlier, but still very much on fire. The damage there perhaps not as severe as it is at the World Trade Center, but clearly America is under attack. I want to bring into the conversation a man who long planned for and never experienced this kind of event. Howard Safer, the former police commissioner and also fire commissioner, if I'm correct, of the city of New York. You got to be wondering about the guys who you once commanded both on the fire and police departments, who were no doubt trying to help people get out of those buildings when they came down around them.
Well, it's incomprehensible. We planned for all kinds of terrorist attacks, biological warfare, chemical warfare, but nobody envisioned two commercial airliners slamming into the World Trade Center. And I can tell you that although New York has the greatest emergency services in the world, they are being strained by the triage, by the number of injured, and by the requirements of this disaster.
I'm just guessing that most of those brave police and firefighters would have been clustered right around the base of those buildings, right? When we thought we had only a fire, clearly there would have been glass falling, We even had reports of people jumping out of the upper floors simply because they couldn't tolerate the smoke anymore. But a lot of your people would have been gathered at the base of those buildings when they came down.
Absolutely. Firefighters and police officers run into danger. They don't run away from it. And unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong, there's probably going to be serious loss of life in both agencies as well as in the civilian area. I've been talking to some of the people at hospitals, and the hospitals are totally overwhelmed. They're triaging people they can help and making sure they don't spend time on people they can't.
I'm sure it's a speech that you never wanted to give, but what do you tell people? What do you tell America right now? How do we behave?
Well, my view is the way we behave is we assess who did this, we find out who they are, and then we make sure that we send a message that is clear, because terrorists only understand one thing. They understand force, they understand strength, and this is a time when we can't be weak. This is a time when we have to go and find out who did this and make them pay for it.
As for the reaction of the citizens of New York, the plea is out for people to donate blood. Is there anything else that New Yorkers can do right now?
Well, I think they can donate blood, but they really need to stay calm. They need to follow the instructions of the emergency service personnel. This is an incredibly difficult situation for police and firefighters. The National Guard will be coming in this evening, and this is something where citizens should pretty much, they don't have to be out, stay home.
Yeah, so stay off the streets if you possibly can. What about communications? We already know that phone lines in and out of New York are swamped. There are going to be thousands, millions of people perhaps across the country who may know somebody who worked in the World Trade Center. What do you tell them?
But this is still a rescue operation. There's still people who need help. There's still people who are alive in that wreckage who can be helped. And what people should do is, unless it's an emergency, don't use your telephone.
Let's go now to a man who experienced something like this. Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, is joining us. Of course, he was in office at the time of what had been the worst terrorist attack America experienced, that of the domestic kind. Frank Keating, as you look at these pictures, what is going through your mind?
Well, this really is a day of agony and infamy for America.
Again, we have lost our connection with Frank Keating, a former FBI agent and the governor of Oklahoma. You got to understand, folks, that many of the communications lifelines in New York City ran through the World Trade Center. There were satellite dishes sprouting like mushrooms from the top of that building. There was a huge television tower, and all of that now is gone. Our Washington managing editor, Britt Hume, once again has the view from the nation's capital. Britt?
This gives us a sense of the state of official worry and knowledge here. Richard Shelby, the senator from Alabama, who is the leading Republican and now vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, has come out. One would presume if anybody would know a lot about what the U.S. officials know, he would. And he said all he knew about was the 2 plane attacks in New York, the one at the Pentagon, and he said that they had heard something had happened in western Pennsylvania. That, of course, consistent with the reports we've had about a Pittsburgh airport. So the sense we have is that many officials, many senior people here in Washington may know less than we do, at least officially, about what has happened here.
All right, Britt Hume, thanks.
John McCain is on Capitol Hill speaking, and we got an ear out for him as well.
All right, Britt, thanks very much. Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, was on the air with us not long ago and described this as the 21st century Pearl Harbor, and that does not overstate it. There may be as many as, on a typical day, there would be 50,000 people working in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and those towers are gone. How many of those people were able to evacuate, we do not know. Once again, to Britt Hume in Washington. Britt?
John, we believe we've been joined now on the telephone by Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona. Senator,
Brett.
thank you very much. As a senior member of the U.S. Senate and a man deeply concerned with the U.S. military, what can you tell us beyond what we know about, first of all, about the attack at the Pentagon?
I can't tell you, Brett, anything that more than the information that you have, and I think that's probably the case with most members of Congress at this moment. I'm not in disagreement with others who said that this is an act of war, and It is, there aren't words to describe adequately the enormity of these attacks and the depravity of those who would commit them. But I have no additional information, and I'm not sure that in the short term there will be a lot disclosed to members of Congress as they acquire it. But the fact is that this is an enormity that staggers the imagination.
Senator, you and others have described this as an act of war. What are the implications of seeing it in that light, rather than a mere lone or isolated act of terrorism? What are the policy implications? What kinds of steps are now possible or might be taken by this government in light of in the light of viewing it as an act of war?
I think that means that the Congress acts to support the President of the United States in any actions that he needs to take to make sure that those who are responsible, whether they be governments or they be individuals or groups of individuals, that whatever measures need to be taken will be taken, and consider the United States now on the basis of a war, and go on to that footing and use whatever assets and efforts that are necessary to bring those to justice, and at the same time prevent ever a reoccurrence of a tragedy and a crime of this enormity.
Senator, we've been seeing just for the last couple of minutes some live pictures of injured people arriving at a hospital in New York for treatment there. Obviously, it would appear, based on what we know, that the loss of life is going to be very great indeed. Your sense from knowing the Pentagon and knowing the area where that airplane hit, fire still going over there. Do you have any? What can you tell us about that part of the building? Number of people work there, that kind of thing.
Well, as you know, the Pentagon is a very large building, and which may work to our benefit here, as opposed to the trade towers. I can't make an estimate, but fortunately, the Pentagon is a very large building. So let's pray that the extent of the casualties has been limited by that. Obviously, there's casualties, but what staggers the imagination, as I heard you talking, is the 50,000 people that work at the trade towers. We pray for them and their families, and it's a tragedy that, again, words become inadequate very quickly when describing something of this nature. But I'm sure the President will lead us. I am sure that the President will reassure the American people, and all of us, all Americans, will commit ourselves to making sure that those who committed it pay the heaviest price, whether they be governments or individuals, including governments that may have harbored groups that were responsible for this, and we will make sure that there's never a reoccurrence. And I know that's no consolation to the grieving families, but I don't think we can do more, except I am confident the President of the United States will lead, and the American people can bestow their confidence upon his leadership.
Senator, what you're saying suggests, as others may have mentioned, that life in the United States will not again be the same anytime soon. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And again, it's incomprehensible and reprehensible, and none of us that I know of ever imagined something this enormity, and well orchestrated, obviously.
Senator, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Brett.
We now have Brian Wilson, I believe, able to report to us on what he's been hearing. He's up on Capitol Hill. Brian, what are you hearing, buddy?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of things, Britt. One of the things that we're hearing in the last few minutes is from Senator Richard Shelby, who is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who told us there has been no advance warning, and they call this very well organized, and he says that they had no advance warning that it was coming at all. And usually they do have some indication from the intelligence community, so very surprised. They say, of course, they know about what happened at the Pentagon. They know about what happened at the World Trade Center. They're still trying to figure out exactly what happened in western Pennsylvania. But members of Congress are coming out and expressing in the strongest terms that the intelligence community failed to give them any advance warning and any kind of information about this, that it caught them completely off guard. One member of Congress, Congressman Kurt Weldon of Pennsylvania, said, the government has failed the people of this country, and that's an indictment on both parties. Britt?
Brian, it does certainly seem that these members of Congress not only had no advance warning, or that the government had no advance warning, they don't seem to know very much about what actually happened, do they?
No, and Senator Shelby said we're still getting briefings, but information is very sketchy and communications are scrambled, an indication that they're not getting a good flow of information, and an overall sense that perhaps more will have to be done to shore up the intelligence budgets in the days ahead, but also, just complete outrage, Britt, that somehow the millions and billions of dollars that we spend on intelligence in this country somehow let this one slip through the cracks.
All right, Brian Wilson, thank you very much. John Scott, that's it from here for the moment. One last note. We learned a few minutes ago that Secret Service agents had sprinted up the street from the White House and cleared people away from a bag that was sitting in the middle of the street there up at the corner of Connecticut Avenue and I Street, right by the Army-Navy Club there in Washington. It turns out apparently that the bag has been found to be harmless. So one more of these false alarms, of which there have been a number, and doubtless will be many more, has been put to rest. John?
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thank you very much. You are looking at the pictures of what is left of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Really not much. These pictures coming to you now live. We're going to show you what happened earlier this morning, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. You can see there are people who are leaning out the windows. At that point, they were hoping for some kind of rescue. There was smoke throughout the building, and they couldn't breathe inside, so they were breaking out the windows of that building and hoping for some kind of rescue. Ultimately, a number of these people simply decided to end their misery and jumped. We are going to get some late information now from Fox producer Dan Cohen, who saw much of this going on. Dan, this is an awful, awful day. What can you add to what we've already seen?
Well, I got here, as you were just saying, and the people jumping out of the buildings, that's about when I arrived. And I'm also an emergency medical technician, so I came down to see if I could help. I identified myself to some of the people that were setting up the medical command posts. We had gotten everything set up. They were doing an amazing job of instantly just having everything organized. As soon as we got the medical command post set up, and I was with a team of other fire department EMTs, we were about to go off and treat some people we had been assigned to treat. All of a sudden we looked up, before we looked up, we heard what sounded like basically a jet airliner landing right on top of our heads. Looked up, and the building was just coming down. The entire command post that I was at just started running. The wall of smoke came up behind us, and I think most of us came out of it. I lost the crew that I was with. They started setting up another command post, and then sure enough, about 5 minutes later, we were treating some of the people that had gotten trapped the first time. Someone said that the tower's leaning, the tower's leaning. We all started running, and that's when the tower came down completely. I managed to get out. A lot of the people did not, and were trapped back under the debris. Once the dust started to clear a little, we went in, took some firemen out. A lot of the firemen had already been in the building at that point. We put as many as we could on some ferries as we were by the water at this point, sent them over to Jersey City for treatment. And from that point on, it's pretty much been chaos. I mean, the New York City Emergency Service has been doing an amazing job of trying to control the chaos, but every time things get set up, there's either more explosions or more debris or more people come out of the rubble.
All right, Dan Cohen, a Fox News producer, also an emergency medical technician who has been in Lower Manhattan trying to help the wounded on this catastrophic day. We can't overstate the level of damage that's been inflicted here. It bears repeating, folks, that America is still standing. We are united, we are strong, and we will find out who did this. But for now, there are thousands, probably, of casualties in not only in Lower Manhattan, but also in Washington, D.C. Let's get the latest now from our Edie Donahue in the Fox newsroom. Edie?
Well, John, America may be standing, but we are certainly in shock. The Pentagon still in flames. Our own correspondent, David Schuster, there. An update now on exactly what happened this morning. The first shot came just about 8:50 Eastern time. That was when the first plane, an American Airlines plane that had been hijacked en route from Boston to L.A. with 92 people on board, slammed into the World Trade Center. We were just finishing up our morning show. We watched that and started speculating what was happening. Within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the second plane had hit the second World Trade Center. That was the South Tower. That apparently, although it's not confirmed, United Airlines says it is missing Flight 175, which was en route from Boston to Los Angeles. Witnesses later say that they saw people from the top floors on fire, jumping to their death. At 9:45, the Pentagon was hit, the south wall, that apparently by American Airlines Flight 77 en route from Dulles, Washington, that is, to Los Angeles. That is a 757 plane. It was carrying 64 people. That ripped a 100 to 150-foot hole into the south ring, the south wall there, the outermost ring of the Pentagon. That, as we said, the fire sirens still wailing there, the Pentagon still on fire. At about 10 o'clock, 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, this United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed. That's a 757 with 90 people on board. Now, what's interesting is that crashed just after the FAA ordered all United States commercial airliners to land at the closest possible place. Right after that order was issued, that plane crashed. Later on, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. We do know that some people, even as high as the 92nd floor, were able to be evacuated safely. In the U.S., for the first time in history, all United States commercial aircraft have been grounded. We know that some internationally inbound flights landed in Canada, but now Canadian airlines and airports have been shut down as well. All federal buildings and most state buildings across America have been closed, and most major landmarks in the U.S. are closed. In New York City, bridges, tunnels, subways all shut down. At St. Vincent's Hospital, where many of the first victims of the World Trade Center crash were taken, we have paramedics out on the street donating, soliciting blood from any donors they can find. They say the need is that great right now. As we say, right now, America seems to be in a quandary. We have had these attacks this morning. The president apparently is safe, but we do not know where he is. He has not made a statement since the official one this morning saying that this was a criminal act and that he would do everything to find out who had committed it. The enemy, though, at this point, unknown. No one has officially claimed responsibility. John, that's the latest. Back to you.
All right, Edie Donahue in the Fox Newsroom, thank you very much. It's not surprising that we haven't heard from the president yet. He took off from Florida, where his scheduled events have been canceled for the day. Took off from Florida probably around 9:30 this morning. And flying time to Washington being what it is, if in fact he is headed to Washington, we wouldn't expect to hear from him for some few minutes now. Let's get the latest on that from our Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor.
John, thank you. We are waiting to hear when the president will land and exactly where and when he might have something to say about all of this. A couple of things worth noting. Brian Wilson has just called to say that he was talking to Congressman Jim Moran, a Democrat of Virginia, who has received a briefing on Capitol Hill, and that Moran says that what they know about that plane crash near Pittsburgh was they believe that was related to an attempted attack on Camp David. Of course, you know, where there was an earlier incorrect report that Camp David had in fact been attacked. All officials now are saying that is not the case. So we have a little bit more from what the intelligence community is apparently telling members of Congress. It appears also that fighter jets are now escorting Air Force One, which would be a standard precaution under a circumstance like this. The last time I can recall, in my own experience, this happening was when President Bush I flew down to a drug summit in the nation of Colombia, where, of course, terrorism is a constant threat. We're waiting, as we noted, for for further word from the White House, where communications are obviously a problem because everybody's been evacuated as to where and when the president will land. So that is basically the latest we have from here. I might call your attention to a quote. This from Chris Yates, an aviation expert at Jane's Transport in London. Jane's, of course, is a company that publishes a number of defense-related and aviation and maritime-related publications, military-related publications. He called it the most audacious terrorist attack ever taken place in the world. There you go.
That cannot be
Rita Cosby, by the way, has something to report as well. Rita's been staying in touch with us by telephone. She's in our air. Rita, what do you know?
Well, Brett, I'm told by the FAA that at this point 22 international flights have been diverted to Canada, and there are 50 flights over the United States. Remember, we're in a full-fledged ground stop right now. This is the first time in U.S. history that they have done such a ground stop, but we are told that there are 50 flights still in the air trying to reach their locations here in the United States, ordered to land immediately. There are also 2 international flights from Europe in which the pilots have not responded, and that is drawing concern from U.S. These are flights that were en route to the United States from Europe, and the pilots have not responded to the FAA, so they're trying to find out if those 2 planes may be in trouble. Also, law enforcement sources are telling us, and this is interesting, that there was word put out through an Arab newspaper about 3 weeks ago that bin Laden himself, the mastermind behind the East African bombings, the embassy bombings there in East Africa, that he apparently did put out word about 3 weeks ago saying that he was planning an unprecedented attack against U.S. interests. Since that time, they got other information that there may be some sort of attack against U.S. possibly governmental facilities. And then, as we know, on Friday, the State Department did put out a worldwide caution basically telling U.S. Citizens and also particularly government and military officials that they should be in a heightened state of alert. But I will tell you from talking to law enforcement sources, I talked to them minutes after the 2 planes rammed into the World Trade Center building, this morning the Twin Towers, that they were very stunned, that they said, look, we had gotten word that there may be some sort of attack, but we had no idea it was going to be on U.S. soil, no idea that it was going to involve airliners and so forth. I will tell you also, law enforcement sources do know that Osama bin Laden, right now they believe he's sort of the prime suspect. They have no idea who's behind this, but they are looking at him because they do say that he and his men did a lot of training. In fact, where they did practice hijackings, where they did have pilots who were on their staff. And in fact, we had reported earlier that 3 people involved in the East African bombings were actually pilots, and that's sort of part of their training. And they get some of that in Afghanistan, also Iran, and a number of other countries. So this is sort of part of their training to prepare for something like this. But law enforcement sources are telling me, and these are intelligence officials, that they were really stunned by today's development.
All right, Rita, thank you very much. It's worth perhaps also adding to this, John Scott, that the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, is controlling the U.S. aircraft that are in the air, including those that are escorting Air Force One. So you get an idea from that just how seriously this threat is being taken by the U.S. military. Back to you in New York, John Scott.
All right, Britt Hume, thanks very much. This was supposed to be an election day in New York. Primary elections were scheduled for mayor here and other offices. Those elections have been canceled. A couple of other more mundane matters considering all that's gone on. Major League Baseball has canceled its scheduled games for tonight. All those games are canceled. Let's listen to one of the witnesses from Lower Manhattan now recount what he saw. This is unedited tape.
There's a woman in a wheelchair, and I got her in the strap wheelchair and just carried her down the steps. Carried her down.
All right, we're having a little trouble hearing the audio there. As you can imagine, Wall Street workers, a great number of other people terrifically impacted by the collapse of the World Trade Centers, that after they were hit by 2 apparently hijacked airliners shortly before and shortly after 9 a.m. this morning Eastern Time. Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating is on the line with us once again. Governor, you have had more experience than anybody dealing with catastrophe of this scale in the bombing of the Murrah building. How should America respond?
Well, no one has had experience responding to a catastrophe of this scale. This is just agony beyond comprehension. It is horrific. It really is a day of infamy. And I am confident as a citizen, because I dealt with the New York Police Department and the New York Fire Service here in Oklahoma City, that they have first-rate authorities. Their emergency management people are first-rate. I'm confident in the military authorities and obviously in the president's leadership. But this is just absolutely
Governor, let me interrupt you for just a minute. Britt Hume has some late-breaking information for us out of
John,
Washington.
we've just learned from the White House press pool, that is the group of journalists who stay with the president at all times, fly with him aboard Air Force One, that the president will, in a matter of minutes, be making a statement. There is some mystery about exactly where that statement will come from, whether it will be from Air Force One or some other place where he may have landed. So we await, obviously, with great interest that, but we are within apparently minutes of hearing from the president for the first time since his initial remarks before he got in the air after these attacks originally occurred. So we wait here in Washington to bring that to you as soon as we have a signal from the White House or from wherever the president is.
And almost certainly, Britt, that would not be from the Oval Office. The White House has been evacuated, right?
The White House has been evacuated, and we have no reason to believe that the president's plane has touched down in the Washington area. But communications here are such, John, that all kinds of things could have happened that we don't know about, and indeed that not everybody here on the ground knows about. But the president, of course, travels with the most elaborate communications facilities. The president has, the latest word we have now is the president has touched down at Shreveport, Louisiana, and it is apparently from there that we will hear whatever he has to say. So we are awaiting we're awaiting a signal, a picture, and the words of the President of the United States coming from Shreveport, Louisiana, a place that the military apparently felt that the president was safe to go. So we are watching and waiting for that, John.
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thanks very much. We will continue to await the words of the president when he gets to a television transmission facility, apparently, as Britt told you, there in Shreveport. Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, still on the line with us. Governor, you've been in this position. You've had to calm a populace horrified by a sudden terrorist strike. What does the president need to say, and how do Americans need to take in this cataclysmic disaster?
Well, this is an attack, an act of war against the United States. In my case, it was a domestic terrorist attack. In this case, ostensibly, it's an international terrorist attack. I think the president will appropriately say the first thing we must do is rescue and recover. We must pray for those who are injured, pray for those who are killed, and anyone who did this, we will get them. Real simple, but focus first on rescue, recovery, and prayer, and I'm sure that's exactly what the president will do.
There is going to be a great uniting of America, isn't there, coming out of all this?
Well, yes, because this was an attack on us, and in that building, that is a melting pot of America. There are obviously thousands of people of all different walks of life, all different races, all different religions and nationalities there. And to make a political statement by destroying innocent men, women, and children is never acceptable in any moral society. And this is absolutely an affront to civilization, and the president and the country will be united and will respond accordingly, and appropriately so.
And an affront to civilization is just what you'll see in the pictures that we are about to bring you. Again, these are unedited. We cannot exactly predict what you're going to see because we haven't seen some of them ourselves. But this is video as one of the towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. You can see the sheer terror on the people as that shockwave of dust and debris rolls toward our camera crew there. And all of a sudden, it is midnight in downtown Manhattan as the crumbled concrete, as the shell of what was once Manhattan's proudest buildings, pair of buildings, as it crumbled to dust. And it is still burning, it is still on fire. Untold numbers of people are dead, untold numbers of people are trapped. The rescue effort is going to go on for days, perhaps weeks. Again, imagine the mindset of these people who were at the base of the building there, watching what they thought was nothing more than a fire. Nobody knew at this point that these buildings were going to collapse. I might bring into the conversation Howard Safer, the former chief of police, police commissioner here in New York City, also fire commissioner as well. Mr. Safer, nobody ever thought the World Trade Center would fall. I mean, that's what the terrorists tried to do back in 1993, and they weren't even close to being successful.
That's true, and even the engineer who designed the Trade Center told me it was designed to withstand a commercial airliner attack. Obviously, that's not correct, but this is incomprehensible and just the kind of thing that, although we plan for every kind of terrorist attack, this is overwhelming for the emergency services in New York, which are some of the best in the world.
let's look at the bigger picture. I mean, everybody wants to know who did this, but it's going to take some time, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this is obviously, and you know, it's not that it's time to worry about the people who are hurt and injured, but this is obviously an intelligence failure. We're going to have to figure out not only why we didn't have the intelligence, but we have to figure out how these hijackers were able to breach airport security and what we have to do to fix that.
It could be something relatively simple. If you wanted to, I mean, I have boarded airplanes before with my pocket knife, a 3 or 4 inch blade. That can be a lethal weapon, and nobody has ever stopped me. There are limits on what kind of a knife you can take on board, but a couple of trained terrorists, trained in hand-to-hand combat, could easily get into a cockpit and commandeer a plane.
Well, that is true. Also, the quality of personnel is very important. The technology is very important, and most importantly, the way you prevent terrorism is through intelligence. You can't prevent terrorist acts when they're taking place, but you need to have the intelligence so you know about them and prevent them before they take place.
Let's check in with Molly Falconer. She's in Lower Manhattan at St. Vincent's Hospital, a scene of absolute chaos. Molly, what's going on there?
John, it has been a scene of chaos all morning. This is a hospital under siege. It's taking many of the victims up from the World Trade Center. They're running out of blood. They're running out of something called Silvadine, which treats burns. They have been raiding local pharmacies and local stores to try and get that. And I'm standing here with Kim White, who managed to make it out of Tower 1 right before it went down. And you're saying you had a hard time with some of those fire doors.
Yeah, the fire doors were locked, and we couldn't get them unlocked. It took about 10 minutes for somebody to actually come and open up the doors, and then we were able to finally head down. But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
And your clothes are in shreds, and you still got debris in your hair. Is that what happened to your colleagues, and how are they?
I have a rim, which that's how we've been able to keep contact with one another. Yes. And I had my one of my male co-workers contact me when I was in the hospital and asked me and told me that he's with the entire team. Mm-hmm. Where am I? And I told him I was at the hospital, so everybody is doing okay.
How are people feeling? And could you see anything? Was there smoke all around you?
Well, when we got down to the bottom floor, we thought we were okay, and then there was a collapse. We don't know what collapsed. There was a collapse of something. The police and fire department told us to go run to the wall and don't look outside. Next thing we know, billowing black smoke just came in, and I mean, it went down my mouth, up my nose, all over the place, and people were hysterical at that time. You couldn't see anybody. You could barely see the lights of the flashlights that were downstairs. But eventually, I think they broke a plate glass window to Borders.
They were breaking glass to try and get out?
To try to get out to Borders bookstore, and we went through down their escalator and then up another escalator to come out, and that's how we finally got out of the office.
I'll let you go. Thank you very much for stopping. And John, we are hearing a lot of victims come, some staggering, out of this hospital. We've got reports that over 160 are inside. They've turned the corridors. They even turned the hospital gym into a makeshift ER. They have hundreds of doctors and nurses on call. Obviously, their disaster plans are in effect. They've sent several triage teams downtown. They have blocked off all of 7th Avenue, which is one of these main thoroughfares right in front of the hospital here, so that they can ferry ambulances from the World Trade Center to St. Vincent's Hospital. And all morning, all we've been seeing are gurneys out on the street standing at the ready for the hundreds of ambulances, I should say dozens of ambulances that are coming in, but who knows, there are no estimates as to how many will eventually get here. A spokesman named Mark Ackerman came out a few moments ago and said he can't put an estimate on how many people will be here, but we'll keep a watch on it for you all the time. Again, there is a call out for blood and something called Silvadine. It treats burns and infections. They have already raided the local pharmacies around the hospitals, and they're calling for more. Back to you.
All right, Molly Falconer at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan, thank you. We want to take you out to Los Angeles now. A couple of the planes that were hijacked were bound for Los Angeles. John Dupree, our correspondent there, has some late-breaking information for us. John?
John, the ripple effect of this disaster felt clear out here on the West Coast. Three of the planes which crashed today were bound for Los Angeles International Airport, where you find me now. American flight number 11 with 92 people on board, American flight number 77 with 64 people on board, and United flight number 175 with 65 people on board, which may have crashed into the Pentagon. All bound for Los Angeles International Airport. Their numbers were not even on the arrivals board here. No one had begun to come here to pick up passengers arriving from those two cities. Now, and only now, one by one, family members and loved ones beginning to show up here at LAX, being escorted into the corporate offices at American Airlines here at Terminal 4, being escorted by United officials to a nearby hotel, being briefed on what has happened, being told that their loved ones, their family members, by all appearances most likely dead. The skies above Los Angeles International Airport, where 150 to 250,000 people each day take off and land, the busiest airport on the west coast of these United States, eerily empty. That's the effect here on the other side of the country. John Scott, back to you.
John Dupree in Los Angeles, thank you. Again, these pictures just coming into us now. This is unedited video of the pandemonium, the fear, the chaos in Lower Manhattan as the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, the tallest buildings in Manhattan, once the tallest buildings in the world, as they collapsed in an incredible shockwave of dirt, debris, smoke, and certainly a catastrophic loss of human life. This was the reaction there in Manhattan. Nobody ever thought those towers could fall. Almost certainly the terrorists who tried to inflict this didn't think they could fall. They perhaps hoped it would happen, but nobody thought there would be this kind of catastrophic damage. William Daley and Howard Safir. William Daley, a former FBI agent who investigated the first World Trade Center bombing. Let's talk about the bigger picture once again. Sure, the terrorists wanted to inflict maximum damage, maximum loss of life, but their real goal is mental, isn't it? Aren't they trying to scare America?
That's true, John. In fact, my role was one after the incident in helping put security back in place for these once prestigious locations. And the thought is, when we do security planning and try to predict where terrorists will attack, we always think of what are the spots that are indicative of the American way, whether it's the World Trade Center, whether it's some other landmark, or what they call trophy building that they like to have exactly what we see here, be up in smoke, and for everyone to be panicked and concerned. So when we try to predict terrorist acts, we look at these, but we really, at the very far end of the spectrum, would think that would ever come down to something like this. We always looked upon something worst case, like vehicle bombs we saw in Oklahoma City, or we've seen over in Europe, individual bombings. But when we look at planes, flying bombs with people in them, which are of and by themselves would be catastrophic incidents if they occurred.
On any given day, any one of these incidents would dominate the news for weeks.
Exactly.
We've had 4 planes crash today, 3 of them deliberately into buildings, 2 at the World Trade Center towers, 1 at the Pentagon, and 1 went down in an airport area near Pittsburgh. Britt Hume is keeping an eye on the situation in the nation's capital. Let's get the latest from him. Britt?
Well, the first thing, John, is that fire at the Pentagon continues to burn out of control and going ever deeper into the building itself. One presumes that the building has been now evacuated of all but firefighting personnel, but that obviously a worrisome situation. There you see a live picture of the plume of smoke, black smoke still rising from the Pentagon. Evidently, the amount of fuel that was spilled or whatever was aboard that aircraft was sufficient to keep that blaze going apace. From Capitol Hill, we learned a couple of other things. Senator John Kyle, Republican of Arizona, said to our Brian Wilson just a short time ago that members of the leadership are in various different, congressional leadership are in various different places, in touch with each other and with the administration. We have a plan, said Kyle, and it is in place. What that's all about remains to be seen. Brian also reports that at the Capitol Police Station, that J.C. Watts, Tom DeLay, both were members of the Republican House leadership, had been seen there, as well as Democrats Dick Gephardt and David Bonnier. So members of the congressional leadership here in Washington, those 4 we know about and have been seen, and they are said all to be in touch with one another as we await remarks by the President of the United States, who is at Barksdale, or is either on the ground or is about to speak from Barksdale military base, Air Force Base there outside Shreveport, Louisiana. As soon as that can be technically set up, we expect to hear from the President. We'll let you know.
All right, Britt Hume, keeping an eye on the things in Washington. Thanks very much. Howard Safer, again, this is something that New York City has planned for a long time. New York always thought it was an obvious terror target. You might say, in a way, we dodged a bullet back in '93 when the World Trade Center was bombed, 6 people dead, 1,000 hurt, but nothing on the scale of what we've seen today.
Absolutely not. This is incomprehensible. The idea of one plane was incomprehensible. The idea of 4 is beyond the realm of conception. And, you know, this is obviously something that was well planned, had to be well coordinated, had to be something that was planned for months, maybe even years. And, you know, finding the people who did this after the rescue operation, and we save as many lives as possible, is really the key here.
How is life going to change in America as a result of this, or is it too early to say?
Well, I think one of the things you're going to see is a re-examination of both our intelligence procedures and our security procedures. Certainly our airport security procedures are going to have to be put under a microscope and look for the vulnerability points, because four airplanes hijacked in one day says the system doesn't work.
Perhaps, Bill Daley, I'm just exploring some options here, but might we see almost armored cockpits from now on? I mean, those cabin doors, as anybody who's ever flown, are lockable but fairly flimsy. Excuse me, Bill, we want to go up to Shepard Smith, who's actually keeping an eye on things from the sky above Midtown. Shep?
I'm actually down in the newsroom now, John, and want to bring you an update on the facts as we've been getting them in just in the last few minutes. The FBI headquarters will be making an official announcement shortly. Fox News Channel will carry that for you as well. As Britt Hume mentioned, we are waiting at Barksdale Air Force Base, where President Bush is scheduled to address the nation in just a few minutes. It's our understanding that there are technical reasons that he's not on yet, but that should be happening shortly. I can also tell you that now the United States border with Canada has been shut down at all crossings. There is a report from Afghanistan now, from Kabul, Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden's people, and actually the Taliban now responding to this. Afghanistan's hardline Taliban rulers have condemned this devastating terrorist attack in New York and the one in Washington, and rejected suggestions that Osama bin Laden could be behind them. The Taliban's ambassador to neighboring Pakistan has now said that bin Laden, the Saudi dissident who has been given asylum in the country, does not have the facilities needed to carry out such an attack. Quoting now from the Taliban, "It is premature to level allegations against a person who is not in a position to carry out such attacks. It was a well-organized plan on connection with the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in East Africa that killed 224 people." Now, there are reports that the victim count at the Pentagon is now at 34. Those are unconfirmed reports at this moment, but certainly with a fire that happened so quickly and an explosion on that level, fears at the Pentagon are certainly running high. We're also getting word from NASA now that astronauts aboard the International Space Station can actually see the smoke rising from Washington and New York, that this plume of smoke that was once the World Trade Center in New York City can be seen from 224 miles in the sky. And on the International Space Station, they are watching in what is certainly a day which will live in infamy, September the 11th, 2001, and the worst terrorist attack in the history of the world. The updates are coming in fast and furious now from individual states across the nation. Suffice it to say that governments across this country are now shutting down all major tall buildings. That's the way it seems, as we've just gotten reports from New Jersey across the river where they watch these buildings fall. The governor of Pennsylvania now asking to use a Fox News satellite truck to address the people of his state. Overwhelming calls now from governors and congressmen and senators for calm across the nation. The president soon to address the nation about how the United States will respond. David Schuster has been reporting throughout the day that the military is now on an alert, which is parallel with alert that would be in place should we be at war. Newt Gingrich saying earlier that this is likened to Pearl Harbor. President Bush will put it all into perspective for us shortly. Those are the latest updates as we have them. Once again, the FBI to make an official statement in just a matter of minutes. This from our correspondent there at the Pentagon. The president to speak down in Shreveport, Louisiana in just a few minutes. John, both of those for you live when they come in here in the newsroom.
All right, Shepard Smith in our newsroom. Thanks very much. Again, to restate, you're looking at the place where the World Trade Center used to stand in Manhattan. A billowing cloud of smoke still rolling up from the foundations of the towers. They crumbled around, well, in the 10 o'clock hour. This after they were struck by two hijacked jetliners in separate incidents just before and just after 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time. 50,000 people work in those buildings on a given day. It's certain that a good number of those people were already at their desks. Witnesses describe seeing people jumping from the upper floors in flames, preferring to make a quick end of their lives rather than suffer disastrously. Here is the picture of the second plane coming in. We are not exactly certain at this point which plane that was. It's believed that was the American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to LAX. We believe that was the plane that was employed as a flying bomb to destroy the second of the World Trade Center towers. The structural steel in those towers, steel that was thought to be strong enough to withstand this kind of attack, ultimately gave way to the heat of the burning fuel from those aircraft. You can see there the pictures, people who have broken out the windows. They cannot breathe. They are leaning outside, waving handkerchiefs, towels, anything they can, waiting for rescue. Rescue that almost certainly never came. The towers crumbled one at a time, as you're looking at the replay here, in a tremendous shower of shattering glass and concrete. Almost certainly there will be casualties in neighboring buildings because the World Trade Center towered so tall above the buildings around it. As it fell, there'd be steel beams, girders, chunks of concrete, enormous piles of material cascading down from 1,000 feet in the sky, a quarter mile up. All of this material falling down to the ground, and anybody who was underneath it would have a difficult time surviving indeed. Also, we take you to Washington, where the Pentagon remains on fire, a fire burning out of control after a hijacked jetliner there slammed into the outer wall, the outer ring of the Pentagon. Now, this one could have been worse. We have early indications of perhaps 36 people dead. But it appears that the impact of that plane actually came on the ground outside the Pentagon. So the fire is still burning there, the Pentagon in flames. Clearly this was an attempt to strike at America's financial structure, the symbol of America in many respects, the World Trade Center, the tallest, the most visible buildings in New York City, right alongside New York Harbor, and also a strike at the Pentagon, the center of America's military. Shepard Smith has a late update now from the newsroom. Shep?
John, we have just gotten this in from the World Trade Center explosions in New York City. The death toll is now estimated at 10,000. This out of New York, and this, according to the Pentagon, that there were undoubtedly deaths at the Pentagon as well. Representative Jim Moran, coming out of the Capitol Police headquarters, has just told Fox News on camera, again, he is a Democrat from Virginia, that the official estimate now is 10,000 have been killed in lower Manhattan as the World Trade Centers collapse to the ground. We're expecting to hear from the president shortly, John.
All right, Shepard Smith, thank you. And that death toll, suffice it to say, could certainly go up. There were thousands of people, perhaps, among them some of New York's finest and bravest police and fire officials trying to effect the rescue of those people who were caught in the top of those buildings. At the time, we thought, and here you look at the replay of the plane slamming, this is the second plane now, slamming into the second tower, and the catastrophic explosion there that certainly killed everyone on board the plane, as well as probably hundreds in the World Trade Center towers. So there were firefighters and police officers on the ground trying to effect the rescue of those people above, and all of a sudden, both of the towers came cascading down around them. Clearly, a great number of the people whose lives have been lost today are the firefighters and the rescue crews who who are trying to help save others. We are awaiting word from President Bush. He was in Florida at the time this all began. As you look at these unedited pictures of people scrambling away from the dust cloud resulting from the collapse of the World Trade Center. President Bush was on the ground in Florida. He was to address an elementary school on what was supposed to be an upbeat event promoting education in this country. President Bush is safe. Air Force One took him to Shreveport, Louisiana. We expect he will be addressing the nation momentarily. Once again, the U.S. military is on the highest state of alert. The kind of alert that would have emanated from the Pearl Harbor attack. And as former House Speaker Newt Gingrich said today on the air on Fox News, certainly this attack will bring with it more casualties than the American forces lost at Pearl Harbor. This is a 21st century Pearl Harbor. Experts have been saying for a long time that perhaps the military attacks of the future would be of this kind. And Bill Daley, former FBI agent, I guess this is the worst kind of scenario. This is what was predicted, but perhaps maybe never imagined.
It was predicted, imagined, but the countermeasures to ever deal with something like this were something you couldn't come to grips with. How are you going to stop commercial airliners from coming down routes around New York that they normally travel?
It's monumental, the scope of the catastrophe. Britt Hume is in Washington now with some more information for us.
Yeah, John, we just, as we've noted, that fire continues to burn at the Pentagon, but the Secretary of Defense, we now understand from Admiral Craig Quigley, his spokesman, who has just spoken to Fox News a short time ago, says that he is in the building, that he is in the National Military Command Center, which is a kind of bunker within the Pentagon, where it is said that communications are working. While the place is a little smoky, the Secretary never left the building, that threat condition Delta, which David Schuster earlier described to you as the most advanced threat condition there is, has been set for the Pentagon. Quigley seemed not to know when asked whether that was the military threat alert nationwide, but as for why it was imposed at the Pentagon, he said, quote, it was simply the prudent thing to do. I think most people would concur with that. The members of the congressional leadership, Brian Wilson reports from Capitol Hill, where he's been at the police station there, have been taken, it is said, to a secure location. We earlier heard from Senator John Kyle that said, yes, they are secure, they are in touch with each other, that the plan, at least for dealing with these things, as far as Capitol Hill is concerned, is underway and in effect. The FBI, John, is saying that they received no warning about this, no warning at all, and for that reason, obviously, that U.S. forces were not on any special alert. That's the latest from here.
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thank you. As you look at these pictures of the smoking side of the Pentagon, it bears repeating that most of the building is still intact and even occupied. David Schuster was in the Pentagon for a good part of the morning. David, are you still inside the building?
John, we are. The pictures that you're looking, if you imagine the camera swinging to the left and going to the next concentric ring, that's where the media offices are, and that's where we are. We can tell you that the hallways, to give you an extent of how big the fire is that continues to rage out of control at many of the offices of the Pentagon on our side, which is clearly, several hundred feet, or if not several hundred yards from where the fire is that you can see on the screen, the smoke is so thick that you really can't see down the hallway more than 20 feet in front of you. That's how thick it is. A short time a while ago, we saw 6 FBI agents walking down the hallway heading towards the part of the building where the plane crashed. We do believe now that the plane, in fact, that it was a direct hit on the south side of the building. Some of the local television pictures, when you look at them, you can see that there is a gaping hole at least 150 feet wide by the helipad. It does not appear that there are any marks on the grass in front, so it does seem as if the plane that struck the Pentagon did hit directly into the E-ring, the outside ring. At the moment, there are still at least, from our estimation, perhaps 20 to 30 offices over 4 floors that continue to burn out of control. The flames are shooting out the windows. The fire apparently continues to spread north along the building, north as far as the side facing Arlington National Cemetery. Again, the Pentagon has been evacuated, except as reported earlier, the National Military Command Center, which is where Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is located. In addition, as far as the threat condition Delta, that applies to some of the Atlantic Fleet, some of the air command and control control the groups that would coordinate U.S. military assets along the East Coast. Many of these assets will be used as far as civilian help, civilian efforts. Furthermore, we're told that all U.S. fighters in the United States are now on alert and are under control of the North American Air Defense System known as NORAD. This is a joint U.S.-Canadian system based in Colorado. Fighters were sent up and escorted Air Force One into Louisiana. But again, the situation here at the Pentagon, as you can see, the fire continues to burn out of control. One of the problems that firefighters are having is that it is very difficult because of how big the Pentagon is to get to some of the inner rings where the fire continues to burn. John?
All right, David Schuster at the Pentagon reporting live. Thank you. Again, apparently in that updated report from David Schuster, the Pentagon took a direct hit. Let's get another update now from Britt Hume in Washington.
Well, John, the latest thing we have, just quickly, is that we're hearing now from through the White House press pool and from our producer Nancy Harmeyer, who's still in Sarasota where the president was, but in touch, that the president has made the statement that he is going to make. He made it to tape. And that tape has been dropped off there at Barksdale Air Force Base, Barksdale military facility there on the Texas-Louisiana border near Shreveport, and he's now headed, we know not where, and that the tape is being ferried to a local broadcasting facility there, and you now see the situation there, some live picture from the Pentagon. Of officials there in the hall, and here is the president. This is the president to make this statement. This is Barksdale. This is tape, folks, not live. I'm sorry, folks. It appears there we saw the president start to come in. That, of course, was videotape, and that was a raw tape feed as it was coming in. It takes a while often for levels to be set and for everybody receiving to get clear that the picture and sound are coming in properly, and it is not uncommon at broadcast facilities when tape like this is being fed. We're going to have another go at it here now and see if this time we can hear this taped remark from the president.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward.
You see what's happening here. This is a videotape being fed from a remote location, and we're trying to get a clear signal and keep it from breaking up and get it onto the air. So sometimes this takes a little bit of time, and we will definitely do what we can to bring it to you as soon as we can see it and hear it clearly. That was the President of the United States. Here he comes again, same tape. See if we can hear it and see it more clearly this time.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
That concludes the President's taped comments from Barksdale Military Base in Louisiana. The President of the United States speaking just a short time ago. We know not now where the President is. You heard him say that the United States military is on full alert. All security precautions could be taken, that he's been in touch with House, Senate leaders and other members of the administration, as well as with foreign leaders. He said we will hunt down and punish those who are responsible for what he called this cowardly act. That concludes Fox News Channel's presentation and Fox News' coverage of this presidential statement. Back to you in New York.
Britt, thanks very much. It bears repeating that apparently Camp David, the president's vacation residence there in Maryland, apparently was the target of another one of these attacks. We haven't talked about it a great deal today because apparently that attempt did not succeed. But there was a fourth airliner, besides the two that slammed into the World Trade Center and the one that slammed into the Pentagon, a fourth airliner, a United plane, slammed into the ground not far from, well, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And the intelligence indications are that Camp David, the president's vacation residence, and it bears